Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Team 7, DxD in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 6, Forbidden Desire. And the full brunt of the Shinto pantheon will rain true hell down upon your people. Fear flowed through her veins as Sana stared directly into the yokai representative's mismatched orbs. Glowing orbs pierced through her very soul, dissecting her and dismissing her as nothing more than trash. Power. Pure, unadulterated power sat atop her shoulders, threatening to crush her should she so much as twitch. That violet-ringed orb, which she had thought to be quite beautiful, now threatened to snuff out her very existence. His other orb. It made Sana sick. Her stomach lurched as she stared at the unique design of his eye. Similar to his violet one, it bristled and pulsated, spinning in an abnormal way and leaking ill intent. Her body. It was failing her. His power was suffocating her. She couldn't breathe. Sana's hands instinctively flew to her throat, as if somehow capable of alleviating the pressure and discomfort forming from Suzuki's raw display of strength. Throat tightening and tears forming in the edge of her eyes, Sana could do nothing but stare at her demise. A teen no older than she. No. Not a teen. She refused to believe it. She couldn't comprehend it. Suzuki couldn't be her age. His power rivaled her sister. Possibly even overshadowing it. No. Then he moved. Sana's violet orbs stretched as Suzuki took slow and measured steps towards her comatose position. Fear paralyzed her, and with each step he took, she was that much closer to her death. No. Stay back. Stop. Please. She screamed fearfully, only to realize that she couldn't speak. She willed her body to do something. Anything. He was getting closer. That sick miasma of chakra and power seeped through his very pores as he continued to close the distance. With each step that he took, the vice around Sana's neck tightened. Please. Stop. No. She mentally screamed. Her eyes burned as tears fell freely down her face. And then he was upon her. His left hand rose towards her, and Sana could do nothing but stare helplessly as it inched towards her. She was reduced to nothing more than a stuttering mess. A rabbit that had ran for as long as possible only for the wolf to catch her in its jaws. She was his prey. A strangled cry finally escaped her throat as his hand gripped her chin tightly, like a parent would do when their child was disobeying them. His touch was firm and powerful, and it burned her skin. His calloused fingers dug into the skin of her cheeks, not enough to draw blood but enough to know that should she defy him. I'm going to break you. Sana's eyes snapped open as a scream tore through her throat, shredding her vocal cords. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, adrenaline coursing through her veins and sweat dripping off her skin. Her chest ached and her lungs burned, as if she had just ran 20 kilometers without the use of her powers. Her short ebony tresses clung to her face, sleek with sweat from her nightmare. Sana's violet orbs finally focused as she instinctively reached for the glasses that sat on her nightstand. Her hands fumbled for a bit, fingers shaking as the adrenaline had yet to wear off. Shakily gripping her spectacles and careful to not break them, Sana placed the glasses on her face. Her breathing had calmed down, if only a bit, as her eyes adjusted to the darkness. Her heart was hammering so fast that she feared for her health. Sana's hands clasped together, fingers ringing atop one another in a manner befitting a child. She cursed herself for resorting to an old habit, believing to have gotten rid of that nervous and anxious tic. She had been an incredibly shy child when she was younger and had developed a habit of playing with her hands and fingers when she was scared or nervous. Violet eyes falling to her lap, Sana grimaced as her fingers shook while ringing against one another. Her eyes strayed away from her hands and towards her naked legs. Her blanket had clearly been kicked off her body and sent to the floor during her sleep. Sana clenched her eyes shut while tightly gripping her left wrist with her right hand. Her face contorted in a painful manner as her nails dug into her skin, forcefully drawing blood. Fear was only triumphed by pain, and inducing it was no different. She could feel the warm liquid on her fingers as she continued to grip her wrist tightly. Her heartbeat had finally calmed down enough to where she could hear herself think. Once her heart settled, her body quickly followed suit. The shaking had died down and was virtually gone. While she was still slick with sweat, she could bear it for now. The Satri heiress relinquished her hold on her wrist, violet eyes staring down at the blood coating her wrists with an expression of apathy. Though her face said one thing, her mind said another. That had been the third nightmare this week. Sana flicked her left wrist, uncaring of the crimson liquid that stained her floor and bed sheets. She inhaled deeply as she scooted backwards, colliding with the headboard of her bed. Despite finally having calmed down enough to think rationally, she still focused on that nightmare despite knowing that she shouldn't. Her experience with Suzuki had scarred her. Sana's legs twitched and a familiar feeling of discomfort nestled near her pelvis. Her legs twitched again, of their own accord, and she bit back the hiss that wished to escape through her teeth. Ignoring the growing sensation between her legs, Sana reached over towards her nightstand, grabbing a bottle of water. Her dainty fingers untwisted the cap as she tilted the bottle towards her lips, greedily swallowing the liquid. After thoroughly quenching her thirst, the heiress lifted her glasses up and wiped her face clean of any lingering sweat. Another twitch of her legs caused an unnecessary heat to spark between her legs. Sana clenched her eyes tightly, teeth gritting by proxy. Why? Why? Sana knew exactly what was happening, but she chose to ignore it. The consequences of such actions and thoughts only spurned her forward. A hiss released through her clenched teeth and she was powerless to prevent it. Why? Why? Stop it. No matter how hard Sana tried, the feeling of pleasure persisted. Her legs continued to twitch and her fingers practically itched towards her pelvis. The heiress shook her head, causing her short tresses of hair to sway back and forth. Desperately trying to distract herself from her growing libido, Sana bit down on her lip. The pain seemed to only fuel her already increasing lust. God damn you! She ignored the pulse of pain that emanated from her curse as her fingers dug deep into the fabric of her bed sheets. Sana's rational and more logical side of her brain protested heavily against her arousal. She knew it was wrong. But damn it, it felt so good. Every day she cursed her inner sin. Like a double-edged sword, it was both a blessing and a curse. For the sin of lust was a powerful sin. Lust was unique. For it had many devices and avenues. Most would categorize lust as sexual desires. While correct, lust was far more complex than that. It was more so an intense craving of something. That of sexual pleasure and desire being one of them. One could lust after power, knowledge, money. Lust was far too broad of a term to only be used when in conjunction with sex. Sana lusted after many things. Knowledge being the keen one above others. But like the double-edged analogy she had given it, it could backfire. Why couldn't she have had a simpler sin? She would have been fine with greed. At least then she wouldn't have these mixed feelings about. That carnal desire rose to the surface instantaneously, nearly blanketing all of her thoughts. A grunt escaped her clenched teeth and Sana had to physically prevent herself from acting out on that sexual desire. Why? Damn it, why? It didn't help that she actively chose to suppress her inner desires and sin. It would do her no good to display these thoughts and actions. While someone like Rias could tame and control her greed, Sana could not tame her lust. For greed was simple to understand and comprehend. Lust was not. The Satri heiress would have laughed at herself had she not been trying to curb her libido. Not 5 minutes ago she had been but a stuttering mess, terrified of him. And now she wanted to. Sana slammed her head against her mahogany headboard. Her legs twitched and heat spread through her core, causing her thighs to rub together. A pitiful whimper escaped her lips as she clawed at the thin fabric of her sheets. Her toes began to curl, nearly becoming painful as her thoughts continued to delve deeper about the ebony-haired teen. The heat emanating from between her legs practically exploded upon centering around Suzuki. Oh Satan, she wanted him. She wanted those beautiful eyes of his to gaze down upon her like he had done in that office. Flaring his power and speaking to her like she was nothing but trash. A low mule escaped Sana as she relinquished her hold upon her sheets. Her fingers danced towards her pelvis and she made no move or action to prevent it. Suzuki had absolutely terrified her. And it only seemed to strengthen the lust she was already feeling. Sana knew that this was wrong. The yokai faction had been at odds with the devil race since the incident with Kurika. While not as versed in politics as her mother and father were, Sana knew that the Shinto pantheon had only stayed their hand due to Yasaka's words. The yokai leader had pull and sway in regards to how the Shinto faction acted, at least to some degree. The Shinto faction wasn't considered a top faction, mostly due to their little size and lack of a powerful army. But their gods were powerful. Japan was their territory after all, and fighting a god on their soil was nothing short of suicidal. One must be egregiously powerful to even hope to challenge a god on their home turf. The devils were powerful and every faction knew this. But Sana knew that even the Satans would be wary in going to war with the Shinto faction in Japan. The odds weren't in their favor, and fighting Amaterasu in the middle of the day was not ideal in the slightest. A low-pitched whine escaped Sana's throat as she pleasured herself, thoughts ceasing almost immediately. Fuck the gods. Fuck the potential repercussions. Fuck everything that wasn't centered around Suzuki dominating her. Oh, Sana knew that at some point she'd need to curb these thoughts about the teen, but right now? The heiress' eyes rolled into the back of her head as her middle finger joined her index. Her knees bent inward, trapping her fingers inside herself. A harsh shudder racked her body as a wordless scream tore through her throat. Sana exhaled harshly as her body continued to twitch from her orgasm. The high persisted for several minutes and she continued to ride it, uncaring of how dirty and troubling her thoughts were. She wanted Suzuki. And she'd get him. Suzuki stirred the soup in his bowl for several minutes, lost in thought. His mismatched orbs were unfocused as he stared at nothing in particular. What ya thinking bout, Naya? Kurika finally questioned, tails swaying idly. Suzuki blinked at the sudden intrusion and slowly turned his head towards to his right, spotting Kurika with her own bowl of soup though hers was empty. He eyed her for a moment before returning his gaze to his untouched food. Nothing. He muttered quietly. Doesn't sound like nothing, dot. She replied playfully, licking her spoon clean. The Uchiha's lip descended downward for a moment before he schooled his expression. He was sure that Kurika had caught the change though. The Nico Shao was incredibly perceptive. It doesn't matter. He eventually bit out after a few seconds of silence, sounding more bitter than he intentionally meant to. Kurika's playful expression disappeared as she stared at the teen. She placed her spoon on the table before speaking earnestly. That's not true. It does matter. Her chair scrapped against the wooden floors, moving towards the teen. You can talk to me. If you want, of course. Suzuki idly noticed that her verbal tick wasn't present. It was odd. He had grown used to the incessant and unnecessary nayas that escaped the woman's mouth when speaking. The Uchiha was silent for several minutes, debating on whether or not to speak about his thoughts. Finally deciding that keeping his thoughts to himself wasn't ideal, he opened his mouth to speak. I miss my home. He uttered quietly, eyes downcast and staring at his bowl of food. I've been distracting myself with anything that could help take my mind off these thoughts, but... He trailed off silently, not necessarily wanting or needing a reply from the Nico Shao. He just wanted to get it off his shoulders, at least that's what he was telling himself. What was your home like? Kurika questioned softly, a hint of understanding in her voice. Suzuki debated on even entertaining the question. He barely knew Kurika and she him. What was the point? They were practically strangers. Sure, he may have told her a part of his life, but that was only because their situations were relatively similar to one another. Again, he told himself that this was the reason and nothing else. It was. Suzuki struggled for a moment, trying to find the right words. Hell. He eventually scoffed out. Shaking his head, he continued. Every day was a struggle. No matter the accomplishments I made, the sweat and blood I lost. It was never enough. Suzuki's Rinnegan glowed beneath his bangs as he stared down at his unfinished food. There were good days. Memories of his mother's smiling face entered his head before quickly disappearing. But I was surrounded by misery. The image of his dying mother appeared in his head and it took far more energy to make it disappear than he'd want to admit. The Uchiha shook his head as a minor pang of pain laced his mind. I did so many abhorrent things in my life. I wanted to atone for those actions and become better. But... He trailed off once more and didn't bother continuing, wanting to hide away and ignore these persistent feelings. You wanted to be better. Kurika spoke, tone soft and gentle. But, she questioned with a tilted head, wanting Sasuke to finish his sentence. The Uchiha did not hesitate as much this time as he did the previous times. But, I do not deserve the second chance I was given. And why is that, Naya? Kurika questioned almost immediately. Because you did bad things. A frown etched on the teen's face. You're simplifying it. Am I? She challenged with a tilted head, tails swaying back and forth. No one's perfect and we all make mistakes. Annoyance crept its way into Sasuke's heart. He didn't bother hiding it on his face either. That means nothing to me. You're lying but okay. She shrugged nonchalantly. You say you don't deserve it but that's not for you to decide. You've done bad things but I guarantee you've done good things as well. Don't let your self-loathing dictate your future actions. You are better than that. Sasuke's fist clenched and before thinking, he snapped back. You don't even fucking know me. Why does it matter? If the Nico Shao was affected by her words then she did little to show it. It does matter. Why, Naya? Because you wouldn't be here otherwise. If you're as bad as you think you are then you would have killed yourself to atone for those actions. Kurika shook her head causing her long tresses to frame her beautiful face. Are you going to give up? Because you're facing adversity? Is that what you want to do, Sasuke? Give up. Anger flared to life in Sasuke's heart as his Sharingan subconsciously reacted to his anger. His chakra threatened to explode due to the woman's words. Not at Kurika herself but at the thought of giving in to his despair and self-loathing. Fists clenched and face set in a scowl, he replied. No. Kurika tilted her head with a raised eyebrow. You sure? Because it seemed like you wanted to give up just a second ago, Is that what you do in the face of adversity, Sasuke? Give up. She was goading him. He knew it and she definitely knew that he knew she was purposely doing it. The annoying thing about it was that it was working. I've never given anything up. He stated with a growl, fist coming down onto the wooden table and shattering it with his strength. The utensils crashed into the ground, breaking and splattering the unfinished food on the floor. Kurika met Sasuke's vicious stare with a blank one of her own. While she wasn't necessarily terrified or scared of Sasuke, she knew she was treading a thin line. He was a walking atomic bomb and while Kurika could definitely sense the other chakra signature that practically dwarfed Sasuke's own chakra, it wasn't guaranteed that they were stronger than him. Kurika's hands grasped the boy's clenched fist, pulling it towards her lap and speaking. Then don't start now. Continue to be the person you want to be. To be the person you need to be. She gently stroked the boy's hand as she continued. I think it's admirable that you want to be a better person even after suffering so much. Kurika's eyes strayed away from Sasuke's own, towards the framed picture that sat across the room. Sasuke's eyes slowly followed hers and he noticed that the framed picture of his mother wasn't face down as it was supposed to be. Before he could question why that was, Kurika spoke once more. You have her eyes. She continued to stroke the boy's hand, well aware of the tension in his body. I'm sure she's proud of you. And I'm positive that no matter what choices you make, she'll always love you. A kind smile blossomed on Kurika's face as her eyes closed. It's a mother's job to love and protect their children after all. Sasuke's eyes trailed back and forth from the picture of his mother and to Kurika. A conflicted expression painted his face and he didn't know whether to be angry or happy. How could he face his mother knowing that he had become a monster? How could she be proud that he had abandoned his home for power? How could she love a monster? No matter what you decide to do from now on, I will love you forever. Itake's final words echoed in his head as he stared at Kurika's gentle smile. His bottom lip twitched for a moment as his eyes watered. After Itake's death, he had promised himself that he wouldn't cry anymore. He had shed enough tears for his family and his mother. But maybe, just this once, he would allow the tears fall once more. Naruto stared at Kakashi as he informed Yasaka, as well as Yasaka's council, about what had happened during their trip to Kyoto. He wasn't surprised. Not in the slightest. Team 7's luck had never been good. Simple tasks and missions usually became life or death situations very quickly. But it was kinda cool that Kakashi had a dragon inside him now. They were almost similar in that regard. He was happy for his sensei. Now Kakashi could become even stronger, at least if the words of Yasaka and the other council members were to be trusted. Apparently the divine dividing sacred gear was super strong. Naruto could see why. Having the power/attack of your opponent was incredibly powerful. It was also very cheap. Naruto was old school in the way of combat. Yes, he was a shinobi and underhanded tactics were basically their thing, but he preferred his fights with his fists. And yes, he was very much aware of the fact that his shadow clones were cheap. What was that boy thinking? Risking war like that? A yokai ranted to Naruto's immediate left. Naruto would have scoffed if he didn't want their ire to focus on himself. That was just like Sasuke to do something like that. He was sure that his best friend had a reason. Sasuke's goal was to purposely intimidate and antagonize the Arases into responding to his threat. Had they given a response that was aggressive, he would have pounced on it. It was calculated and ruthless. Kakashi explained simply, dressed in new clothes so as to not answer useless questions. He had already briefly explained his run-in with Volley. Graphia's involvement was taken into account, but we did not fully believe their relationship was tight-knit enough to warrant an appearance. They operate on our soil, anything taken as a slight to the yokai is dangerous for them. Kakashi shifted in his standing position, wishing to whip out his book and read. We had hoped to pressure the girls into making a rash decision, but it failed. The devils will be informed regardless, and our task was accomplished. It was rash and completely uncalled for. You bring unnecessary risk to our people. Another random yokai commented out, displeased with how Kakashi and Sasuke chose to handle the meeting. The silver-haired Jonin glanced at the man before placing his hands into his pockets. I don't remember asking for your opinion, councilman. I, quite frankly, do not care about what you view as right or wrong. My mission was to inform the Arases that the yokai faction, and by proxy the Shinto faction, seek reparations. How it was accomplished does not matter. What does matter is that it was accomplished. A snort of laughter escaped Naruto and he didn't bother trying to hide it. What Kakashi said was incredibly savage. And correct. But mostly savage. Is something funny, boy? The yokai to Naruto's left snarled in annoyance. Naruto's cerulean orbs cut directly to the man as he stared at him. Yeah, it was funny. Kakashi-sensei is a funny man. Don't ya think? He questioned back rhetorically with a sly smile. The yokai snarled once more, and before he could speak, Yasaka raised her hand to halt any further hostilities. Calm yourselves. She demanded with hardened eyes. Once the room became silent, she gazed back at Kakashi and gestured with her hand. Kakashi-san, continue. The Jonin shrugged his shoulders, ignoring the nasty looks he received from some of the other yokai. Afterwards, Sasuke and I went to confront Kurika and her group of supernaturals. We fought, they lost, and I am now the owner of Divine Dividing. One of the more neutral yokai spoke aloud, tone curious. Who exactly wielded the sacred gear? Also, how are you now in possession of the Longinus? To our knowledge, sacred gears manifest in humans during their birth. Regardless of tier and power, all sacred gears follow this rule. Kakashi glanced at the female yokai for a moment before shrugging his shoulders. His name was Volley. He was a devil/human hybrid who boasted an incredible amount of raw power on top of possessing the Divine Dividing. During the end of the exchange, Sasuke deemed him enough of a threat and killed him, taking the sacred gear out of his body and transferring it to me. Sasuke killed him? Naruto questioned with a raised brow, arms crossed against his chest. Glancing towards his former student, Kakashi nodded. I assume that sacred gears function like the Bijiryu do. If you take them out, the user dies. Could it have to do with the fact that Divine Dividing is sentient? The blonde questioned while leaning back in his chair. I sense an actual signature inside your body now, sensei. Before Kakashi could answer that question, Albion spoke telepathically. It does not matter if the sacred gear is sentient or not. Taking it from the human it was originally given to will result in their death. All of the yokai, along with Naruto, were surprised to hear the voice of an unknown individual inside their minds. "I didn't know you could do that, Albion," Kakashi commented with a raised brow. "There's a lot you don't know, partner." Vala was not some random devil/hybrid either. He was a descendant of the original Lucifer. The room went silent at that information. As always, Team 7 continues to have bad luck, Naruto commented with a shake of his head. If he's a descendant of the original Satan, then that means the devils will have a reason to want war. He trailed off as a frown formed on his face. That is not necessarily true. Albion spoke up once more. Vala may be the descendant of the original Lucifer, but he was not affiliated with the devil faction. He resents his heritage. In fact, he was a part of the terrorist group that goes by the Chaos Brigade. Naruto blinked at the information, ignoring how the yokai in the room gasped at the information. Wait, so he was working under Off-Eyes. Again, the room went completely silent at how casually Naruto spoke regarding Off-Eyes. That is correct, Albion confirmed with a nod that went unseen. However, it is more appropriate to say that he was in the group to find strong opponents to fight and defeat. He did not necessarily care about Off-Eye's goal. Huh. Naruto commented nonchalantly with a raised eyebrow. I haven't seen Off-Eyes since she dropped us off in Kyoto. Wonder what she's up to. An immense and incredible pressure appeared out of thin air following Naruto's words. A mountain's worth of pressure settled upon Naruto's shoulders, who seemed to be relatively undisturbed. His cerulean orbs turned towards the source of the power and a happy smile formed on his face. Off-Eyes-chan. Floating in midair directly in the center of the room was the infinite dragon god herself, Off-Eyes. Her blank eyes scanned the room for several seconds, passing over the random yokai and disregarding nearly every one of them. Her eyes eventually swept past Kakashi, sensing the dragon inside of him. You hold Albion now, she stated blankly, slowly descending from the air and landing without a sound. It seems Vala is in fact dead. Kakashi raised an eyebrow, not as affected by her presence as he was during their first meeting. Hello, Off-Eyes-chan. It is nice to see you again. How are you? The dragon stared at Kakashi for several moments in silence before slowly making her way to his position. Though she was no longer in her childlike form, opting to choose the form that Team 7 had convinced her to shape-shift into, she was still nearly 2 heads shorter than Kakashi. The draconic woman stopped in front of Kakashi, head tilted up towards the man and eyes blank. And she stared. And stared. And stared. Pat my head, she demanded rather than requested. Kakashi blinked at the demand before tilting his head. Say please. It is rude to demand things, Off-Eyes-chan. The little dragon blinked at the statement before tilting her head cutely. Please pat my head, she corrected easily. A smile appeared on Kakashi's face as he rose his gloved hand towards the woman's head. After several seconds of head pats, he placed his hand back into his pocket before speaking. Better? He asked with a raised eyebrow. The dragon only nodded her head. After doing so, she turned her head towards Naruto's position, spotting the teen sitting beside Yasaka. Naruto, she stated blankly while nodding her head. I came to confirm Vala's death. It appears that he is indeed dead. While he was useful to my overall goal, his death does not hamper it. I'm sure he wasn't that bad of a guy, Naruto defended with a raised eyebrow. Wrong, Kakashi corrected. He was definitely an asshole. He gave off asshole vibes. Albion did not bother correcting Kakashi because even he knew that was the truth. Where have you been, Off-Eyes-chan? The pseudo Juabijin hierarchy questioned curiously. We haven't seen you in forever. Off-Eyes regarded the statement for a moment before replying. I was busy. Understandable, Naruto replied easily, not really bothered by the woman's cryptic answer. She had saved them from perishing in the elemental nations. If she wanted to vaguely answer, then that was her right. Off-Eyes was silent for a moment as her head tilted curiously. While Vala is dead, it seems his team is not. Turning her head back towards Kakashi, she spoke. Why is only Vala dead? The silver-haired Jonin shrugged his shoulders lazily, reaching into his pocket and procuring his hentai manga. Sasuke deemed Volley a big enough annoyance/threat that he needed to be killed. It is not like his teammates were truly that close. They didn't seem that affected by his death. Appearances can be deceiving. Afaiz replied blankly. Isn't that the pot calling the kettle black? Naruto questioned rhetorically. I do not own a pot or a kettle. Why would they be black? Is that of significance? The dragon questioned with a cute tilt of the head. Naruto chuckled loudly as he responded. Never mind, it isn't that important. Afaiz didn't pursue the boy's statement and only nodded her head. I will be taking my leave then. I only wished to check up on things. However, if you need to speak directly to me then just speak my name with intent. I will appear. Goodbye Naruto, Kakashi. The infinite dragon god disappeared almost immediately after, her presence completely vanishing as if she hadn't been in the room. There was several long seconds of awkward silence that hung in the room. Well, that was surely interesting. Kakashi commented offhandedly. The room practically erupted into chaos after his statement. Sakura's eyes lazily fluttered open. She immediately clenched them shut as the light from the sun pierced through her bedroom window. A moment later she groaned out in pain. My heaaaad. Her hands immediately rose to her temples as she gently massaged her head. She definitely drank far too much last night. Green chakra bloomed to life in her hands as she began to reduce the effects of the hangover. After purging the effects of the alcohol she slowly rose to her feet. Emerald orbs blinked several times as she noticed the copious amounts of empty liquor bottles. She spotted 1, 2, 3. 5. 5 bottles. Kami, she was becoming more like Tsunade with each day that passed. She shouldn't be allowed to get her hands on alcohol. Rubbing her face, she sifted through her dresser, grabbing several articles of clothing before making her way into the bathroom to take a shower. Stripping herself of her clothing, Sakura made to step into the shower before pausing as she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the large mirror of her bathroom. Sakura proceeded to stare at her body with a tilted head. Unlike many of the times where she used to stare at her naked body, something felt different. She couldn't pinpoint it. The pinkette continued to stare at her body, noticing the hardened muscles and odd scars that covered her body. She made a face as she focused on her intimate parts and pursed her lips as she did so. Why did something feel different? After another moment of confusion, Sakura shrugged her shoulders with a small smile before stepping into the shower. She could figure out what was wrong later. Right now though? She stank. After properly cleaning and grooming herself, Sakura returned to the large mirror. She continued to stare at her reflection, analyzing each and every part of her body with a critical eye. There was nothing wrong. Why? She usually always found something Wait. Nothing was wrong. Sakura's emerald orbs fluttered several times as she focused on her body. She twisted her body several times, bending and contorting her body as if trying to find something that was wrong. She even began to flex her muscles, showing off her rather impressive biceps and abdomen. There was still nothing wrong. But nothing was wrong. Nothing was wrong. Sakura continued to repeat the mantra in her head before it finally clicked. She didn't find anything wrong with her body because there was nothing wrong with her body. The girl's dainty fingers trailed along her rather muscular form with a smile that was as radiant as the sun. There was nothing wrong. Tears slowly formed in her eyes as she covered her mouth, trying desperately to quiet the happy sobs that escaped her throat. Nothing was wrong. Before Sakura could continue her sudden realization, a knock at her door rang out. Blinking several times in slight surprise, Sakura hurriedly dried her eyes before speaking loudly. 1 second. The pinkette proceeded to dash through her room, throwing together an outfit and heading for the door. She opened the door and raised an eyebrow at the servant. Greetings Sakura-sama. Asuna bowed at the hip before slowly rising. Yasaka-sama has requested your presence. She has a mission for you. The medic blinked before offering the wolf yokai a small smile. Lead the way, Asuna. And please, there's no need to be so formal. Asuna said nothing in response but only nodded her head with a smile. Without another word, she began to make her way towards Yasaka's office. On normal occasions, Sakura would have struck up conversation or even attempt to have small talk with Asuna. But right now she was far too giddy and riding the high due to finally overcoming her body issues. For as long as could remember, she had hated the way she looked. Too skinny or too muscular. But now? There was nothing wrong. Sure, she still liked bigger breasts, but that was the least of her worries at the moment. It was a win. She felt great. No longer was there this invisible weight and voice that hovered over her telling she was worthless and not good enough. She was beautiful. She loved how she looked. She still couldn't properly believe it, but she felt amazing. The duo arrived at Yasaka's office several minutes later. Asuna proceeded to bow before slowly rising and offering a smile to Sakura. "You seem very happy today, Sakura-sama. It was nice to see you again." The pinked cheeks turned rosy for a moment as she smiled embarrassingly. "It's that obvious." Asuna chuckled as she responded. "Very much so. Whatever it is that has you so happy, I'm glad. You seemed very stressed over the past week." The wolf yokai bowed once more before turning around and speaking. "Good luck on your mission, Sakura-sama." After bidding the wolf yokai her goodbyes, Sakura opened the door to Yasaka's office. She blinked several times upon noticing how many people were actually in the room. Her emerald eyes trailed over all of the yokai before landing on Yasaka and Naruto. With her head tilted, Sakura wondered why Naruto was here. Actually, yeah, never mind. She knew exactly why he was here. The conversation between her and Yasaka had been about Naruto before she eventually downed an entire liquor bottle. Not her best moment, that was for sure. "Sakura. How are you?" Naruto greeted boisterously. A smile found its way to her face as she greeted Naruto, though in a more controlled and calm manner. "Naruto. Yasaka-sama." She bowed before continuing. "I'm doing well, Naruto." "Very well." Her blonde teammate was silent for a moment, his cerulean eyes growing exceptionally sharp as he stared directly at her. The boy's action had almost taken her aback. "You seem different." He probed quietly for a moment, hand coming up to stroke his chin. He continued to stare at her for a few more seconds before shrugging his shoulders, not bothering to think about it any further. "Well, whatever it is, I hope it's good for you." Sakura offered the boy a smile as she nodded her head. "Thank you, Naruto." He said nothing but did give her a cheesy thumbs up. "Greetings, Sakura." Yasaka finally spoke, offering the girl a polite nod of the head. "It seems some things have come up that require your expertise." Sakura blinked at the statement as she tilted her head. "Do you need me to teach medics? Or develop some kind of cure that only affects yokai? Or do you need me to destroy something? I'm pretty good at that." An amused smile split Yasaka's features as she replied. "Oh, I'm very aware of your destructive capabilities. Naruto-kun has told me plenty about that." Her golden orbs traveled towards the boy, who adopted a betrayed expression. "I have not." He lied. "Awfully." Sakura rolled her eyes at the obvious lie before responding. "You are the worst liar." "I am not." He yelled back while pointing his finger at the girl. "I'm the best damn liar in the world." Era. "Is that so, Naruto-kun?" Yasaka spoke up with a large smile. When the boy faltered, she proceeded to nod her head. "Good boy." The Kyuubi turned her attention back on the pink-haired medic before speaking. "I do not require your assistance in the medical field, nor do I need your power to destroy things. Naruto-kun has spoken of your diplomacy and proclaims that you would be a suitable delegate for the communication between the Devil Heiresses and Kyuubi." The medic blinked in slight surprise, her emerald orbs shifting towards Naruto, who offered her a smile with a thumbs up. Remaining silent for but a moment, Sakura returned her attention to the leader of the yokai faction before responding. "He would be correct. I used to serve as an assistant to the leader of our village. I am knowledgeable about politics and have no issue with resorting to violence should the need arrive." The comment was thrown in offhandedly, and while Sakura knew that politics was a patience game, sometimes your fists solved things faster than your words. At least that's what she learned from Tsunade. Rarely was someone ever allowed to say no to Tsunade. The woman could destroy mountains with her fists. Being on her bad side was just stupidity. Good. Yasaka commented with a nod of the head. You leave for Kyoto today. One of my servants will equip you with the resources and information you need. Your living situation has been sorted out and the RSEs are already aware of why you'll be in Kyoto. Sakura was silent for a moment before a grimace formed on her face. Please don't tell me that I have to go to their school. Please, for the love of Kami, don't send her to school. An amused smile formed on Yasaka's face as she placed her elbows on the table, handed clasped and covering her mouth. That is entirely your choice. The documents and paperwork have already been signed and are ready to turn in. It is your decision whether or not to partake. It would make your job of watching over the RSEs easier, but it is up to you. The pinkette made a face that bordered on disgust and annoyance. Let's just say I did go to Kyoto Academy, hypothetically, would I even have to do actual school work? If I do, then no. I'm not doing it and would rather kill myself. Yasaka cleared her throat to hide the laugh that escaped her throat. She failed of course, but nevertheless. You would not have to do any work. Your job is to keep an eye on the RSEs and relay messages between both parties. If trouble surfaces, I expect you to handle it and act accordingly. That goes for stray devils, fallen angels, and any other problems you may come across. While the RSEs occupy Kyoto and have been given free range to deal with issues on their own, I want you to handle these issues. Am I understood? Hi, Yasaka-sama. Sakura replied dutifully, reminiscent to her times as a shinobi in Konoha. Nodding her head, Yasaka smiled. Good, that will be all, Sakura. You are to head out and meet our yokai informant. He will come to you and pass off the things you will need. Be safe and do not take unnecessary risks. If a situation occurs where you are unsure on how to proceed or if you believe the situation to be out of your hands, then contact myself. If worse comes to pass, then Suzuki will be sent as backup. Sakura nodded her head at the response before offering the woman a bow and exiting the office without another word. I think that went rather well. Naruto commented with a smile. Yasaka agreed with a nod of the head. Allow us to continue where we left off, yes. She gestured towards the rest of the council who had remained silent during the exchange. Sakura sighed quietly as she held the cell phone in her hand. What an odd and incredibly useful piece of technology. Any basic information that she needed was there. She could look up answers to questions in the matter of seconds. With the object also having the ability to send instant messages and allow you the ability to speak with other individuals who possessed a similar device. It was so useful. Sakura pocketed the cell phone before cracking her neck and taking off in a sprint towards Kyoto. Chakra surged through her pores as her speed increased to the point that she was virtually a blur to any yokai or human. In a matter of seconds, she was out of Kyoto and en route to the city of Kyoto. It would take a few hours of constant running to arrive at Kyoto, but she didn't mind it. She loved to run. After several hours of running, Sakura's speed began to slowly decrease, the city of Kyoto finally coming into view. Pulling the phone out of her pocket, Sakura glanced the time, noticing it was nearly 5 p.m. The pinkette nodded her head before continuing to make her way towards the city, passing by cars with little issues and jumping over buildings that blocked her path. It took her another 20 or so minutes for her to finally enter the city. Upon reaching Kyoto, she proceeded to focus chakra into her legs. Bending her knees, she leaped up towards the tallest building in Kyoto. Her feet made contact with the side of the building before sticking as if her feet were an adhesive. The pinkette proceeded to sprint up the building, being mindful to avoid the large glass windows. Upon reaching the top of the building, Sakura stood on the edge of the large skyscraper. Her emerald orbs drank in the sight of the entire city, easily seeing everything in the city with little issue. Her emerald orbs immediately spotted several points of interest. 2 rather large malls on either side of the city, the infamous Kyoto High Academy, several other notable schools, and other establishments that could prove helpful to her job. Sakura crossed her arms against her chest as she awaited for her contact to appear on the building. Taking a seat on the edge, Sakura pulled out her phone and began to fiddle with it, trying to learn what she could concerning the device. After 10 or so minutes of fiddling with her phone and learning several things about it, she sensed a chakra presence scaling the building. Leaning further over the edge, her emerald orbs spotted a rather average and normal-looking yokai scaling the building with relative ease. He seems so bland. Perhaps that's the reason he's a spy. When the man finally reached the top of the building, he spoke and made a gesture with his hand, his thumb and pinky finger extended with his other 3 fingers clenched. Tuna mayonnaise. Sakura nodded her head before replying. You're right. I'll contact Gojo-sensei. The average-looking man nodded his head before reaching into his jacket and procuring several documents and folders. He passed the items over to Sakura, who took them without question. The man then repeated the gesture he had used when greeting her. Tuna, tuna. He immediately jumped off the side of the building, not bothering to wait for a response. Sakura's eyes followed the man for several seconds before he seemed to just disappear into thin air. Thinking nothing of it, Sakura reached into her jacket and pulled out a small sealing scroll. She placed the objects in the center of the scroll before pulsing her chakra. A poof resounded from the scroll, having successfully sealed the objects away. Sakura picked the scroll up before pocketing it once more and leaping off the building. Sakura flipped several times in the air before twisting her body, landing on the ground with ease, not even cracking or destroying the concrete from her actions. The medic slowly rose to her feet before making her way towards a random direction in the city. As she passed by the humans, occasionally greeting anyone who greeted her, she stretched her senses out into the city. She wasn't nearly as good of a sensor as Naruto and Sasuke was, but she knew a thing or two. It took several minutes for her to eventually sense something, but when she did, a large frown formed on her face. She could sense several fallen angel in the city, and while a majority not then were grouped together in the outskirts of the city, she could sense one in the middle of the city. Sakura deduced that this was a pure fallen angel. She had already been informed of Rias and Sana's peerage. While Rias possessed a fallen angel hybrid, she was still a hybrid, and would this give off a different signature? Kakashi's report about the feeling wasn't matching what she could currently sense. The pinkette immediately set off towards the direction she could sense the fallen angel. Upon growing closer to the area, she could spot what appeared to be some kind of barrier. Sakura stared at the barrier for several seconds before pulling out a kunai and prodding it, making sure that she could actually physically destroy it without harming herself. When her kunai failed to disintegrate, burn, or any other way that would maim the woman, she nodded her head. Sakura's right fist clenched as she chambered her fist towards her chest. Her muscles flexed as chakra practically exploded outward from her chambered fist. The girl released a warrior cry as her fist detonated against the barrier. Upon making contact with the barrier, it practically disintegrated, not being able to even stand up to Sakura's abnormal strength. The medic proceeded to make her way farther into the barrier, spotting the fallen angel flying in the air. Her eyebrows furrowed as she spotted a human boy lying on the ground with a large hole in his chest. Her medical training immediately kicked in, and Sakura practically blurred to the boy's side, shocking the fallen angel at the sheer speed in which she appeared. Apparently the creature hadn't sensed her destroy said barrier with little issue. "Who are you?" the scantily clad woman questioned, black wings flapping idly. Sakura ignored the insignificant woman as her hands alighted with chakra. Placing her hands over the boy's chest, she proceeded to direct chakra into the boy's wounds. Several seconds passed by in silence before Sakura's eyebrows furrowed. Why wasn't it working? He was still alive. He should be able to receive the healing. The brown-haired teen blinked weakly as blood ejected from his mouth, staining his academy uniform. "Be beautiful," he weakly complimented. Sakura ignored the compliment as she continued to try to heal the boy's sizzling wound. She didn't understand why he wasn't healing. It was as if his body was actively rejecting the chakra. Sakura's sixth sense shrieked at her, and she immediately tilted her head to the side. A bright light zoomed past her face, impacting against the ground several meters away from her and exploding. Sakura's attention finally left the brown-haired teen as she stared at the fallen angel slowly moving towards her position. An annoyed scoff left her mouth as the woman reared her hand back, golden energy forming in her hands. "If you're going to interrupt my kill, then I'll choose dash." The fallen angel was unable to finish her sentence as Sakura disappeared into thin air. Tsutenkyaku. The fallen angel was physically incapable of reacting as Sakura's heel descended upon the woman's back. A harsh snap echoed through the area, followed by a sonic boom and then ending in a loud explosion as the woman's body impacted the cement. The fallen angel was killed near instantaneously due to the force and strength from Sakura's attack. Sakura landed on the ground before sweeping her arm through the smoke and dust she had kicked up from her attack. Her emerald orbs immediately spotted the mangled corpse of the fallen angel. The woman's body was contorted in a grotesque manner, with her spine practically exiting through her stomach. Bones stuck up from the woman's skin, indicating that the force had been far too much for her to handle. Sakura scoffed quietly before returning to the dying boy's side and kneeling beside him. A frown etched itself onto her face as she noticed the boy's laboring breaths getting heavier and raspier. She didn't understand why she couldn't heal his wound. She had treated plenty of other yokai with their injuries and even some humans. Why was his body in particular rejecting her chakra? Sakura placed her hand on the boy's chest, being mindful to not place any pressure on his wound. A sad expression formed on her face as she spoke. "I'm sorry. I can't save you." She lowered her head, saddened that the life of a young human teen had been snuffed out for no apparent reason. A wet cough answered her, followed by the boy's voice. "It's not your fault." A harsh cough had his chest rising and falling, blood seeping out from his gruesome wound. Sakura returned her gaze to the boy's face, noticing his brown hair was matted and caked with blood. He was relatively average, but she could admit that he was slightly handsome. "What's your name?" she asked quietly, wanting to provide comfort for the boy. "Issei." "Hi Hyuda." His voice trailed off quietly as blood continued to dribble down his mouth. His chest rose and fell one last time as a raspy exhale left his mouth. Sakura's eyes closed as she bowed her head, offering a silent prayer for the now dead boy. Her hand proceeded to rest directly over his wound as she spoke. "I'll avenge you, Issei Hyuda. You did not deserve to die so young." Sakura's emerald orbs hardened, and as she began to rise, a surge of red energy vacated the boy's chest before shooting directly into her body. Sakura's eyes widened dramatically before the feeling of fire spread throughout her entire body. She released a scream of pain before falling to her knees. Her nails dug deep into her skin, drawing blood as she struggled to understand what was happening. The pain. Okami, it was almost unbearable. Everything was on fire. She couldn't even properly think. The pain only seemed to grow stronger and stronger as Sakura's body hunched over. Her forehead made impact with the cement as she continued to scream out in sheer pain. Finally unable to take any more, Sakura's eyes clenched tightly before her entire body went slack. Before she could fully succumb to the darkness, she glimpsed a red, draconic-looking gauntlet upon her left hand. Her body made impact with the ground a moment later as she was rendered unconscious. Chapter 7, Little Pig. Fuck. Fuck fuck fuck. Rias cursed angrily as she sprinted through the city of Kyoto. Damn it. I let myself get distracted for 1 minute. 1 minute. She berated herself silently, crimson hair flailing wildly behind her. The heiress had seen Issei exit the school with his girlfriend several hours ago. It was going according to plan, and her familiar had informed her that the couple had finished their date and were making their way to one of the parks in Kyoto. It was all going according to plan. Up until she was distracted by a call from her brother. "Son of a bitch." She grit her teeth angrily as she rounded corner after corner, speeding past random humans without a care. All she had to do was wait until Yuma showed her true colors. She'd reveal herself as a fallen angel and try to kill Issei for his sacred gear. Of course she would fail in her endeavor, and Rias would show up at the last second to save Issei from his demise. He'd be indebted to her, and she'd then ask him to join her peerage. It was a win-slash-win. He'd get to continue living, albeit as a devil, but alive nonetheless. And she'd get an asset with potential. But of course her beloved brother had to derail everything. Why? She was fine here in Kyoto. He was worrying too damn much. While she certainly understood his stance regarding the situation that had happened with Suzuki and the Shinto pantheon, she was still an independent woman. She could do this. Suzuki had absolutely terrified her, but she was the leader of this territory, along with Sana of course, and together they'd handle this situation and come to a solution. She had done enough of her own research regarding the situation that had happened with the yokai and the devils. She sympathized heavily with the yokai. They suffered for something out of their control, and now Yasaka, with the Shinto pantheon's help, was taking matters into their own hands and cracking down of their region. Japan belonged to the Shinto pantheon. The yokai's home was Japan. Do the math. Rias knew that she was trespassing on their land even if her role said otherwise. She was certain that the yokai in the bigger cities absolutely despised her and Sana. Rias continued to sprint towards the last destination that she had sensed from Issei and the disguised fallen angel. Her eyes strained in the darkness as she caught glimpse of a barrier nearly 50 meters in front of her. She was close. Just a little further. If only Issei hadn't ditched the flyer she snuck into his pocket. She'd have already been there to save him. He might not be. The crimson-haired devil shook her head, ridding herself of those darker thoughts, and only proceeded to sprint faster towards her destination. Or she would have, had she not hit the ground due to an unseen force that absolutely shattered the barrier holding Issei hostage. Ria's eyes widened as the barrier crumbled to the ground before disappearing entirely. Who's there now? She had sensed a brief amount of energy surge before the barrier disintegrated. The heiress quickly rose to her feet before doubling her efforts towards the epicenter of the now destroyed barrier. She made it all of 10 feet before a sonic boom erupted from Issei's position. The earth beneath her feet practically exploded as she struggled to find her footing. It took several seconds for the shockwaves to subside, and once they did, Rias continued on her journey. Come on. Come on. Please be alive. Please. Come on, come on, come on, come on. She mentally chanted. Rias continued to run towards Issei's position before sensing a unique presence. Her eyebrows furrowed in confusion as an abundance of chakra saturated the air and surrounding area. Chakra? Who? Could it be the delegate sent from Kyoto? Ria's eyes widened and hope blossomed in her heart. Maybe. Maybe this person had saved Issei. Sprinting around one last corner, Rias came upon the epicenter of the barrier and her mouth dropped in horror as she immediately spotted Issei with a giant hole through his stomach. Blood pooled around his body, soaking into his academy uniform. Ria's hands clenched hard enough to draw blood as she continued to make her way towards the boy's position. Her eyes scanned the area and she cringed as she spotted the fallen angel's body. The woman's spine was sticking through her stomach. How the hell did that even happen? The heiress turned away from the disgusting sight before spotting a woman with pink hair. The woman seemed to be unconscious as she tossed and turned while groaning out in pain. She has so much chakra. Rias made to move towards the girl before a large amount of chakra swept over her, completely halting her movement. Don't move. Ria's eyes shifted wildly across the area as she tried to find the source that had stopped her. What was happening? Why couldn't she move? Out the corner of her eyes she spotted a young man making his way towards the girl's position. Rias would have furrowed her eyebrows if she could. This man. Was that a tattoo on his face? The man, or rather teen, had several markings that covered the lower portion of his face. He had spiky white hair that jutted out in several directions with violet pupils. He wore a high-collared jacket that was currently unbuttoned, revealing his mouth and throat. The violet-eyed teen glanced towards her position before continuing towards the pink-haired woman. He scooped the girl up in his arms before glancing back to Rias and speaking. Kelp. He stated simply before completely vanishing, taking the pink-haired woman with him. As soon as he disappeared, Rias was able to finally overcome her lack of movement. What the hell was that? She exclaimed in confusion. The teen shook her head immediately afterwards before making her way towards Issei. Damn it. She had been too late. An innocent teen had been killed. She was going to get so much shit for this. Why hadn't she just dealt with the fallen angel in the first place? Sakura groaned out in pain as her body writhed in the hands of the yokai spy. Violet eyes strayed towards the woman as an unsure expression formed on his face. He couldn't sense anything that was relatively wrong with the medic, but he could sense the entity that now existed in her body. This was going to complicate things. Probably. Inumaki hoped so at least. Redoubling his efforts, he adjusted Sakura's body before disappearing into thin air, leaving no trace of their presence. Naruto was silent as he observed Yasaka's inner council bicker with one another. His disinterested orbs strayed over each council member as he rested his temple against his clenched fist, propping his head up. Something is wrong. He mentally spoke to the Baijuyu. She will be fine. Kurama replied almost instantaneously, no doubt sensing the anomaly in Kyoha alongside Naruto. The Jinhyuriki debated his partner's words for a moment before accepting them. Sakura was strong. She'd be okay. If not though? He'd take his gloves off and this world would know exactly who he was. Naruto was rounded from his thoughts as dainty fingers glided over his right hand, caressing his digits in a tender manner. The teen glanced towards Yasaka, who sported a small smile upon her beautiful face, no doubt sensing his displeasure and disinterest regarding the current meeting. It was mind-numbing. The daily meetings and discussions ate least. Day in and day out he'd been forced to listen to the elderly yokai in Yasaka's council spew nonsense about mundane issues. Jibes that he and his team were made multiple times, and while Naruto didn't particularly care what they thought, it was still annoying. Though, he could definitely understand the hesitance on their part. 4 incredibly powerful humans show up out of the blue, wielding chakra and matching the power of their strongest gods? Yeah, he'd probably be a little antsy and jumpy as well. He'd try to explain his reasoning but had given up on the 3rd day. These yokai were old and stuck in their ways. There was only a handful of young members in the council and they were easily outvoted 9/10 times. But that was the game of politics, wasn't it? The old prevail and the youth are demonized. Adopting a more progressive approach to worldviews was seen as weakness. Which didn't particularly make sense to Naruto. Why would you not want to adopt more open-minded views? Things get done a hell of a lot faster if people are on the same page. Alas, some people enjoyed rereading the same 3 chapters instead of finishing the damn book. Once more, Naruto was brought out of his thoughts at the tender touch of his. The teen blinked slowly as he glanced towards Yasaka, staring at her with furrowed brows. The woman didn't seem to notice his action as she continued her gentle ministrations. What was Yasaka to him? Why had it taken so long for this question to appear? Well, she was certainly important to him. The woman had welcomed he and his team with open arms. She'd been incredibly accommodating with their situation and the shift of power they clearly presented to not only the yokai factions in Japan but as well as the Shinto pantheon as a whole. That was a conversation for another day and one he'd been avoiding for a while. It was just a giant headache and he'd rather put it off for as long as possible. Yasaka was patient, kind, gentle, beautiful in a way that should be absolutely illegal. She possessed an incredibly adorable child, and while Naruto had been uncomfortable with the little Kyuubi's advances at first, she had certainly grew on him. Kuno was so precious and it was nearly impossible to not like her. The girl put on a front most of the times, but he could sense emotions due to Kurama's innate ability. Kuno was a lonely child and he could certainly see why. Yasaka was usually gone for most of the day, stuck in meetings and dealing with the safety of all yokai in her district. The woman rarely had time for herself, let alone her own daughter. But he'd seen the woman expertly juggle her time with Kuno and her work, and while she was anything but perfect, she was trying. And that was something that Naruto resonated with. For someone who hadn't grown up with parents or any family for that matter, it was something he'd have wanted from a parent. Meeting his father during his initial fight with pain had been a brief one, and while brief, Naruto had seen the man as who he was. Minato had damned him to a life of pain, even if unintentionally, but had believed in him from the start. And while Naruto had eventually forgiven his father for the life he'd been dealt, he hadn't known the love of a father until officially meeting the man during the war. He had come to understand his father as he fought alongside him against Obito and Madara. The hardest choices are often the most painful, and Naruto had always wanted to be acknowledged and loved for him. Not for his actions. Not for his power. For him. Yasaka exhibited these actions as well, but it was slightly different. There was certainly an attraction to power and status, but she'd been interested in who he was rather than what he did. Naruto knew, to some degree at least, that the love of a father and a mother was different compared to that of a partner. He hadn't been shown either up until the later stages of his life, and even then, they'd been fleeting. The blonde teen had remembered Hinata's words during his battle with pain, and even then had been hard-pressed to believe that someone out there felt that way about him. He'd grown up believing that he'd been put in this world to be hated, to be ridiculed and to be spit on. To think that there would be someone/people that believed otherwise was difficult to come to terms with. Naruto had been treated poorly his entire life, and to suddenly be accepted because of his actions was a hard pill to verbally swallow. It was definitely bittersweet. For an entire populace who cursed his being to suddenly welcome him with open arms because of his feats was. It was annoying. He'd always been a good person at heart. While he certainly had his more childish moments as a kid and a shinobi, he'd always done his best to see the bright side. To always see the cup as half full instead of empty. To always persevere when faced with hardship. Perhaps that's why he couldn't truly accept, or rather return, the emotions that Yasaka subconsciously emitted. He didn't truly understand how to process and deal with them. They weren't together, but they kind of were. They'd been practically conjoined at the hip since the arrival, and it was very clear that Yasaka wished to pursue and push their relationship further. It wasn't like he didn't want to do so, but he just didn't really know how to. The woman also had a child. Sue him. It was a lot to take in, and he was still a kid, to some degree. Just because he had been forced to mature faster than his peers meant little in the grand scheme of relationships. Naruto sighed quietly to himself as he rubbed Yasaka's hand, returning the gentle gesture. His head hurt just thinking about this stuff, and he really just wanted to sleep now. Too many old memories had just resurfaced, and he found himself wanting. Yasaka's index finger tapped the back of his hand 3 times, forcing his attention. He met the woman's gaze and could see the concern swimming in her golden orbs. Naruto was tempted to assuage the woman's worries, but thought better of it. He really just wanted to leave the room and head back to his personal quarters. Manifesting those old memories of his home and old friends cut deeper than he'd initially expected. The teen merely offered a sad smile as he shrugged his shoulders, prompting the woman to give an understanding nod. Yasaka rubbed his hand tenderly before subtly gesturing for him to leave the room. Naruto offered the woman a thankful smile as he gently grasped her hand, caressing the back of her hand with his thumb. After doing so, he stood to his feet before placing his hands into the pockets of his hoodie and leaving the room without another word, ignoring the whispers from the various yokai. After leaving the council chambers, Naruto slowly trudged his way through the large compound. He offered half-hearted nods and greetings to each yokai he passed as he continued to think of his home. He missed Konoha. The weather. The atmosphere. The smell. Naruto's eyes were downcast as he stepped through the door of his personal quarters. Darkness greeted him as he stood at the entrance, hands returning to the pockets of his hoodie. The nostalgia of opening his door to the black of his home resurfaced in his mind. No one to welcome him home. No aroma of delicious, home-cooked meals from a loving mother. No boisterous greeting from said woman. No gentle greeting from a father. It was just dark and quiet. So similar to his old home. The teen glanced around the dark room, easily scanning the large compound and making out the shapes of furniture and other necessities he owned. Naruto stood at the entrance for another few seconds before shaking his head quietly and eventually walking away, leaving the door to his compound open. Yasaka bid her council good night, seeing each yokai off individually. She was seated quietly for several seconds before sighing quietly and rubbing her eyes tiredly. The woman exhaled heavily for a moment before standing to her feet and exiting the room several minutes later. The yokai leader made her way through the large compound, greeting each and every yokai that passed by her. Several minutes passed by as she continued her journey to Naruto's personal quarters. Upon reaching the teen's personal compound, a small frown made its way to her face. Why was his door open? The woman reached the entrance of the boy's home, gazing into the darkness of his quarters with furrowed brows. Naruto. She called out quietly, hands resting upon the entrance to his home. Are you here? She waited a couple of seconds for a response before spreading her senses outwards. She blinked in confusion when she sensed the boy on the opposite side of the compound. The beautiful yokai closed Naruto's door before disappearing in a burst of speed, heading towards Naruto's position. It took the woman a minute or so for her to reach Naruto's position. Her head tilted upwards, spotting the blonde-haired teen sitting upon the top of one of the various towers in the compound. Yasaka bent her knees before jumping towards the tower, silently landing on the platform with little trouble. Her golden orbs stared at the boy's back for a few moments before she began to make her way towards him. Her sandals quietly clacked upon the wooden platform as she sauntered towards the boy's situation. The yokai leader reached the boy's seated position before she plopped down beside him, close enough to touch with little issue but far enough for the boy to have his own personal space. A gentle breeze swept through the area, ruffling her hair. Yasaka resisted the urge to shiver as the cold bit through her clothes. The rustling of clothes drew her attention to her companion, noticing that the boy's hoodie was being pulled over his head. A gentle smile frames her face as the boy offered his hoodie to her. Yasaka nodded her head gratefully before pulling the larger hoodie over her body, shielding her from the cold. No words were spoken between the two as they basked in the silence of each other's presence. Usually Yasaka would strike up a conversation, but at this moment she was content with the silence. She knew that something was bothering him. But she'd prefer if the boy voiced it himself. The minutes continued to pass in silence as Naruto's eyes were drawn to the full moon in the darkened sky. His fingers idly traced the various grooves in the wood as he contemplated something to say. Sighing quietly to himself, Naruto's left hand came to the back of his neck as he spoke quietly. It's a nice night, huh? Well, that was rather lame, wasn't it? Yasaka's eyes cut to the boy for a moment before returning to the darkened sky, illuminated by the thousands of stars in the sky. It is rather beautiful, no? Yasaka agreed with a small smile. The Juobijin hierarchy placed his hand back at his side, gripping the edge of the platform. So, how was the meeting? Anything important happen after I left? The woman sighed quietly as she shook her head, tails idly swaying to and fro. Not particularly, no. Though, plenty of questions about your sudden disappearance. Naruto glances at the Kyuubi for a moment before averting his gaze and staring at the various compounds and homes below him. He contemplated his words for a few seconds before shrugging quietly. Just, got lost in my head. He shook his head as if trying to convince himself. I'm fine now. I don't think so. Yasaka quietly disagreed. When the boy's gaze fell upon her, she continued. You've been distressed recently. You wear your emotions on your sleeve, Naruto. Are you doing well mentally? Golden orbs met cerulean as both blondes stared into each other's eyes. They maintained contact for nearly an entire minute before Naruto abruptly averted his gaze. No, not really. He finally spoke, tone quiet and despondent. I miss my home. And my friends. His eyes narrowed sadly as he dipped his head. I had thought that I came to terms with it a long time ago, but... Trailing off silently, Naruto sighed quietly. When Sasuke and I failed to reverse the jutsu, I continued to hold on to hope. Desperately believing that one day we'd find a way to save everyone. A bitter laugh escaped the teen as his hands gripped the wood beneath him tightly. 6 months of anger, sadness, and hope. If it wasn't one thing, it was another. I fought with Sasuke and placed the blame on him, trying to convince myself that what had happened wasn't my fault. I blamed myself. Even if it was completely unnecessary and totally out of my control. I thought that if I had handled things differently, then the elemental nations would still be here. Naruto shook his head as he closed his eyes. Everything that happened was out of my control, and I know this, but I just can't accept it. I'm angry every single day. But what does being angry solve? It does nothing for me, but is it wrong of me though? To feel this anger? Naruto's fingernails dug into the wood, carving the hardened material as he glared out into the distance. I saved my world. I defeated a fucking goddess. I defeated Sasuke and practically forced him to turn a new leaf. And then I still... His voice cracked as his emotions began to overwhelm him. Tears built in his eyes and he grit his teeth, nearly cracking his molars. I still get punished. I sacrificed my life for the world, and what do I get in return? Naruto's hands crushed the wood beneath him, rendering the material to dust. His fists clenched tightly as dust particles slipped through his fingers. Everyone I've ever loved and held dear to my heart. They're gone. My world ceased to exist, and with it, my dreams. His tone was full of venom as he stared at nothing in particular. I was cursed at birth, and even now it seems that no matter how hard I try, I always end up losing. The silence afterwards was deafening. Naruto belatedly realized that he was panting heavily. He closed his eyes, willing his anger away. He nearly jumped as Yasaka's hand made purchase against his own. The woman's fingers threaded through his own as she clenched her hand shut, his own following suit. I can't begin to even understand the pain you feel, Naruto. She spoke softly, forcing the boy's gaze upon her. Her golden orbs met his blue ones as she squeezed his hand. There is nothing wrong with being angry. No one can fault you for it. You've suffered so much and a lesser man would have crumbled. You're strong, Naruto. Yasaka squeezed the boy's hand once more before leaning her head on the boy's shoulder. I might not understand your pain, but my ear is always open. I'll be here for you. I promise you that. Naruto stares down at the woman, words failing to form for several long seconds. Eventually he settled on accepting her words and closed his eyes, leaning his own head atop the woman's. A stray tear slowly crept its way down Naruto's face as he squeezed Yasaka's hand. The elemental nations may be gone. And with it, the memories of his friends and loved ones. But he had never given up before and he'd not do so now. He would forever cherish his loved ones and his home, but Japan was his home now. He couldn't give up now. Not when he had something to truly fight for and protect again. Naruto squeezed Yasaka's hand tightly one last time, silently vowing to protect her and his new home. Sakura's eyes abruptly snapped open, body shooting straight up to a sitting position. Sweat cascaded down her body as her chest rose and fell with reckless abandon. Her eyebrows furrowed in confusion when she noticed the area she was in. An endless plain of land stretched before her and seemed to travel as far as her eyes could see. She blinked several times at the sight before glancing towards the sky. A frown framed her face as she stared out into the sky. Instead of a regular-looking sky, she was greeted to the sight of a purplish-blue sky. There were several blotches of various other colors in the sky, and the longer she looked, the stranger it got. What? Where the hell am I? She questioned quietly to herself, not expecting a response. We are in your mind. At least I believe that to be the case. What she didn't expect was a response, let alone one that carried such a deep baritone. The medic turned towards the voice before her eyes widened to saucers. That is a big dragon. Standing, or rather hovering, behind her was a gargantuan red dragon with a long neck and dark, green eyes not unlike her own. Various red and golden spikes jutted outwards from the dragon's body. That's a dragon. What in the fuck was happening? Who the hell are you? Sakura screamed out while adopting a fighter's stance. Her chakra proceeded to explode outwards as her seal released, saturating the area with her power. Several dark seals stretched along her body, giving her an exotic look as she adopted a fierce expression. If this dragon wanted a fight, then she'd give it one, regardless of how strong it was. Mama didn't raise no bitch. Well, she technically did, but semantics weren't important right now. It was fight time now, baby. The giant dragon stared down at Sakura, green eyes sizing the woman up before a deep rumbling noise emitted from its body. Sakura tilted her head with narrowed eyes before speaking. Are you? You're laughing at me, aren't you? The girl's eyebrow twitched as she yelled out. Stop laughing at me. I'll beat your ass. The red dragon seemed to only laugh louder at the pink-haired medic. It threw its giant head backwards, puffing out its body even more as it responded. I like you. I think we'll get along just fine, partner. The words brought Sakura up short. Her face contorted in confusion before she tilted her head. Partner? She questioned confusingly. What are you talking about? Who even are you? And what the hell are doing in my mind? The giant dragon paused for a moment before it slowly dropped to the ground, shaking the land as it did so. Its wings unfurled for a moment, enlarging the beast for a moment before it placed its appendages on the ground. Where are my manners? I have many names, child. I am one of the two heavenly dragons, Drake. Though, most of this world knows me as the Welsh Dragon. I have also gone by Drake Gotch and the Red Dragon Emperor. I despise being called the Red Dragon Emperor of Domination, though. Sakura blinked several times at the introduction before her eyes widened greatly. Wait a minute. You're the dragon in the boosted gauntlet. She exclaimed in surprise. Drake proceeded to nod its giant head at the question. I am indeed that dragon. It trailed off silently, emerald orbs staring directly into Sakura's own. The medic was silent for a few moments before deactivating her seal and loosening her stance. My name's Sakura Harano. It's nice to meet you. She questioned rather than stated, still confused as to why the boosted gauntlet dragon was in her head. If this was a dream, she'd very much like to wake up now. Likewise, partner. The dragon responded simply, nodding its large head. Sakura opened her mouth to speak before abruptly closing it. She was silent for several moments before exhaling heavily and hanging her head. I have a sacred gear now, don't I? That is correct, partner. Drake affirmed. Sakura sighed heavily once more before rubbing her eyes with her index and thumb. That kid I saved. He possessed a sacred gear, didn't he? Correct. And that sacred gear was you. You are very intelligent. Sakura was half tempted to throw a punch at the dragon. She couldn't tell if it was being a smartass or not. The medic continued to rub her eyes before rolling her neck, popping the joints. She rubbed her face with both hands as she took in the information she had, what little of it she possessed at least. I need a fucking drink. Where are we going, Papa? 9 fluffy tails idly swayed back and forth as Kuna stared up at Naruto, an adorable smile painted on her face. Papa. He still wasn't quite used to that word yet. It carried such a foreboding feel to it. And he didn't truly know why either. He never had a father growing up, and taking the role as one, especially at such a young age, was daunting and quite terrifying. Pushing those negative thoughts and fears to the back of his mind, Naruto offered the girl a small smile. We are going to do a little shopping. Yasaka tells me you need supplies for your school work. He knew that the woman could have had a servant do this, but she was certainly pushing that father role onto him. Not that he minded or anything. Kuna was a precious little thing and he'd protect her. The 12-year-old scrunched up her face at the mention of school. Bleg. School isn't fun. Naruto wholeheartedly agreed with that sentiment. He had hated the academy growing up, and most of it stemmed from the neglect he received and the actual sabotaging of his academic learning. Nodding his head and holding his hand out for the girl to grab, he replied. I didn't like school either, but it's important, Kuna-chan. When the girl groaned quietly, he chuckled lightly. Tell you what, if you ace your project then I'll treat you to ice cream. How does that sound? Kuna's golden eyes practically shone like the sun as she jumped up and down, tails flailing about in an excited manner. You promise? Naruto gripped the girl's smaller hand in his larger one before replying with a small smile. Pinky promise. His other hand rose towards the girl as he stuck out his digit for the girl to reciprocate said action. You're the best, Papa. She exclaimed happily, locking her own pinky around his. Naruto's cerulean orbs softened as he stared at the young Kyuubi. A warm feeling spread throughout his body as the girl proceeded to hug him. He may have his reservations about that particular term and the role needed to fulfill it, but he'd do his damnedest to be the father that he never had. Squeezing the girl's hand in his own, he turned towards the large gates of Yasaka's compound. Onward! He shouted with a large smile that was mimicked by the adorable Kyuubi at his side. Yay! Marcus Black was not a good man. Such was the life of a cruel and accomplished assassin. He had slain thousands and walked upon mountains of corpses to get to where he was at. Armed with a unique and heavily coveted power, he was a dangerous individual to fight against. Even more so when money was on the line. He had crossed his suppliers plenty of times and cared not for the bodies that lay at his feet. Killing was a skill. One that he was intimate with. Marcus had grew up in the mud. From a young, starving child to a conniving, evil man. He had been born and raised in sin. He had drew his first blood at the tender age of 7 and had swam through an ocean of blood following his upbringing. Instinct. Brutality. Cruelness. Paranoia. They all mixed together to create the abomination that walked through the streets of Kyoto. Beady eyes swept through the crowds of unknowing humans and ignorant yokai. Marcus Black was an assassin. One that enjoyed his job wholeheartedly. The rush of a kill was matched by no other high. The more high-profile the target, the better the high. Marcus adjusted his black vest, right hand gliding over one of his various pockets and pulling out a retractable knife. The man unfurled the unique-looking blade, spinning it through his fingers before retracting it. High-profile targets generated quite the amount of money. And while he cared little for the materialistic things in life, he knew that money talked. So when a document landed upon his doorstep with the image of a young yokai who possessed 9 foxtails, who was he to pass up the chance to kill off one of the yokai faction leader's daughter? The young Kyubai's protection detail had been relatively lax as of lately, and Marcus cared little as to why that was the case. He was Marcus Black, one of the most ruthless and well-known assassins to exist in the United States. What would a couple of second-rate yokai do to him? His power nullified others, and each individual he killed with a unique power was harvested as his own. With a sea of bodies at his feet, he had collected a plethora of useful and powerful abilities. The white-haired assassin weaved through the crowds of people and yokai alike with little issue, his presence practically non-existent. His beady eyes locked onto the tiny Kyuubi yokai as she walked hand in hand with a blonde man that possessed whiskers upon his cheeks. Had Yasaka's husband finally returned? The lad seemed to be on the younger side though. Marcus thought nothing of it as the blonde man led the younger girl into a store. The assassin stared at the entrance before completely disappearing from sight, his presence vanishing completely. The man followed after the duo, weaving his way around the lingering bystanders. He watched as the blonde man rummaged through various aisles, hand in hand with the young girl, searching for specific objects. Marcus flicked his trusty knife into his hand as he slowly stalked towards the young Kyuubi. His beady eyes narrowed on the girl as he took slow and measured steps towards her. It would be a relatively simple kill. A clean cut through the girl's throat and she'd be dead within seconds. Marcus could just imagine the look of despair and pain upon Yasaka's face as she heard the news of her daughter's gruesome death. The assassin silently crept up to the girl's position completely undetected. His wrist rotated and his arm shot out towards the girl's throat, intent on gouging through the flesh. Many things happened during that single second. The first was the fact that his knife didn't cut through flesh. The second was the ironclad grip that prevented him from moving. The third was the blank look that he was receiving from the blonde man, despite having completely erased his presence. How? Oi. The blonde man spoke in a blank tone as his hand squeezed Marcus's arm tightly, producing a disgusting crunching noise as the man's bones were viciously grinded together. What do you think you're doing? Marcus withheld the urge to grunt in pain as the man's grip increased nearly tenfold. He immediately tried to pull away but was shocked when his arm was wrenched out of its socket. A grotesque popping sound filled the air as he stumbled backwards. Fuck. He eventually swore in pain, his form shimmering brightly before reappearing for all to see. Marcus's ebony eyes finally deigned to rise towards the blonde man, and when they centered on the man's eyes. What? What is this feeling? Vermilion, slitted pupils stared into the confines of Marcus's very soul. Emotions that Marcus had thought he had killed and buried long ago resurfaced with a vengeance, spreading through his veins like liquid fire. The assassin's adrenaline surged as his fight or flight activated. And right now? Flight. He needed to get away. Away from this monster. He'd be killed. No. Marcus tried to pull away once more, and before he could even hope to move his foot, he was rooted in place by the man's chakra. A mountain proceeded to drop atop his shoulders, leaving him gasping and struggling to breathe. Marcus was forced to kneel as the monster before him tilted his head. The scenery around them changed in an instant. No longer were they in the store. Yasaka's child was nowhere to be found as he was alone with the monster before him. Marcus' eyes widened in fear as a gargantuan shadow proceeded to loom over the blonde man. Its towering form flickered for a brief moment and Marcus glimpsed matted, red fur. What do we have here? A booming voice resounded through the pitch-black chamber as the water beneath his feet swayed back and forth violently. Marcus' eyes moved away from the blonde monster in front of him before practically freezing at the sight of the looming beast in front of him. Twin orbs of scarlet stared down at him, framed by a mountain-sized head. Dozens upon dozens of rows of serrated teeth sat in the creature's mouth, its face pulled back in a terrifying snarl. Marcus' blood ran cold as the titanic beast continued to stroll towards his position, its lumbering movement causing vicious tremors to shake the area. With each step the beast took was another step that cemented Marcus' doom. I've made an egregious mistake. I need to escape. With those thoughts circulating through his core, Marcus jumped to his feet before fleeing from the man and beast as fast as he could. Gotta get away. Gotta run. Can't look back. Run, little pig. Run. Run. Run like the vermin you are. The titanic nine-tailed fox roared loudly, shaking the area. You can't escape. The beast proceeded to cackle, its menacing voice reverberating off the walls of the sewer. I will find you, Marcus Black. And when I do, I will flay your skin from your bones. Ah ha 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 ha. Marcus ignored the beast's words as desperation and fear surged through his body. Survival was the only thing on his mind. He had to get out. He had to leave. Little did Marcus know. He was already dead. Chapter 8, Omniscient Judgment. Papa. Naruto's crimson orbs traveled away from the comatose assassin before settling on the little Kyuubi. His eyebrows furrowed in slight confusion when Kunu's head tilted in a curious manner. Your eyes are red. She replied in a simplistic manner. They look nice. His eyes were red? AHH. Kurama must have been angry. It had been an awfully long time since Kurama's influence had been allowed to bleed through. I'm angry. The beast snorted derisively. Look in the mirror, mongrel. Shut up. He responded childishly. The blonde Jinhuriki closed his eyes for the briefest moments before slowly opening them and fixating a smile on his face. It was an incredibly strained smile and Naruto was having a rather tough time trying to control his growing bloodlust. Kurama's chakra was practically bubbling at the surface. Thank you, Kunu-chan. He responded stiffly as a shadow clone popped into existence beside him. I have something that I need to handle now. It'll be quick, so don't give me that look. Kunu's frown only grew deeper as the shadow clone gently took her hand before leading her away. I don't wanna. The shadow clone, wisely, interjected with a smile. Do you want ice cream? Yes. The little Kyuubi responded almost instantaneously. Then let's get some ice cream. The doppelganger responded simply with a smile. Its eyes left the girl for all but a few seconds, zeroing in on its creator and nodding its head. Naruto watched his shadow clone lead the little yokai out of the store. When he was certain that they were gone, his attention shifted towards the assassin as his eyes bled red once more. Let's talk. Naruto's right hand descended upon the man's throat as red chakra sprang to life on his appendage. The two men proceeded to disappear in a yellow flash. Sasuke's bottom lip twitched for a moment, concentration lapsing for the briefest of seconds as the feeling of Naruto's chakra washed over Kyoto. It was brief, fleeting even. But it had most certainly happened. A disturbing feeling if he was being honest. Naruto seldomly allowed himself to get angry. Even less so, allowing his anger to consume him. He'd only felt the boy's true wrath a handful of times. Sasuke could literally count the number of times Naruto allowed his anger to control him on one hand. Something was clearly wrong. Sasuke released a quiet sigh as his eyes slowly opened. His gaze slowly traveled towards his female companion, who was currently seated with her hands on her knees, before speaking. Expect company. Kurika's nose twitched cutely as she tilted her head, cat ears twitching towards the sound of his voice. The Nico Shao slowly opened her eyes with a confused gaze, practically asking why. Someone is angry. Sasuke mentioned rather than explained. You have not formally met Naruto, have you? Kurika's legs slowly unfurled from beneath her, knees popping quietly due to the position they'd been in for the past several hours. I finally get to meet your best friend, Naya. She questioned rather excitedly, tails swaying side to side in an exaggerated manner. Sasuke said nothing but dipped his head in agreement. Why is he ko-dash? Whatever Kurika was about to say was cut off as the individual they had been speaking about appeared before their very eyes. And with his appearance followed the weight of his chakra. A chakra so heavy and angry that Kurika nearly gagged on the spot. Vile, disgusting and angry. Hatred multiplied on a scale that would make a devil green with envy. Kurika stared at the man with something akin to fear. Eyes wide in horror, the man's eyes practically peered into her very soul. This was Naruto? The man that Sasuke had told her about. This was no man. His animalistic eyes traveled towards her and Kurika felt her heart practically stop. Caught in the gaze of an apex predator with nowhere to run. She truly believed that she was going to die. Until he spoke, that is. He spoke with what appeared to be an apologetic expression on his face, though it was hard to tell due to the animalistic features upon his face. I'm sorry. I'm a little angry right now. The blonde teen closed his eyes and the transition was instant. The all-encompassing anger and rage disappeared, smothered by a calming and relaxing aura. His animalistic features tapered off and in its place was a rather normal, albeit handsome face with cute whiskers. Who is that? Sasuke questioned with narrowed eyes, dual orbs focusing on the catatonic man lying on the floor. Kurika blinked several times as her eyes shifted towards the man in question. She hadn't even noticed that. What the hell? Granted, she did believe that she was about to be killed, one could forgive her. Naruto glanced at his friend before nudging the comatose assassin with his feet. This is an assassin who's currently feeling the wrath of Kurama. A harsh kick to the ribs flipped the man over, revealing his unassuming features. His target was Konu. The Uchiha took a single cursory glance at the assassin, ignoring Kurika's curious gaze and spoke with a raised eyebrow. And you want answers? A single nod was Naruto's response. Sasuke sighed quietly before slowly rising to his feet and gesturing for Kurika to do the same. I'll handle it. And in the meantime, go be useful somewhere else and calm down. Everyone felt your anger. Naruto's eyes narrowed at his friend, watching as the Uchiha grasped the assassin by his collar, dragging him along the floor and into one of the various rooms of his apartment. So, you're this Naruto I keep hearing about, Naya. Cerulean orbs shifted to the cat yokai in the room, assessing the woman with a calculative expression. Several seconds of silence reigned in the room before Naruto offered the girl a smile. You're a good influence on the prick. The snort of laughter that escaped Kurika caused Naruto's smile to grow more genuine. Oh wow. I was not expecting that. Another giggle left the Nico Shao as she continued. It is nice to meet you, Uzumaki-kun. Sasuke-kun has told me a lot about you. The tension in Naruto's shoulders began to slowly evaporate as he raised an eyebrow at the woman. Just call me Naruto please. No need for formalities. And I can only assume that you are the infamous rogue devil yokai, Kurika. The yokai sketched a rather amused now, left arm flourishing as she did so. A pleasure to make your acquaintance. Well. A pause. It was nice meeting you, Kurika. I'm going to speak with Yasaka. I'll be seeing you around. The Neko Shao's expression wavered for a moment before Kurika offered a simple nod and goodbye. Naruto nodded his head in acknowledgement before glancing towards the room that Sasuke taken Marcus to. His expression slowly shifted, becoming something ugly as he began to make his way out of the room. Whoever sent that man would regret it. Sakura awoke with a small gasp, sweat dripping down her face as her heart thundered furiously in her chest. Tuna. The medic subconsciously reacted to the voice and lashed out with a fist. Her fist was dodged, if only barely, by the man who had spoken. Tuna mayonnaise. The high-collared man spouted as he backed a few feet away from the woman. Sakura's emerald orb slowly focused as she glanced around the room. Her eyes briefly scrutinized the white-haired man before darting around the rather Spartan room. What happened? A brief spike of pain emanated from her head, forcing her eyes closed. Chakra surged in her hands, a green glow illuminating the rather dark room as she placed her fingers on her temples. As she massaged her temples, several memories began floating towards her. A barrier-like dome. Some bat-winged cosplaying hooker with a light spear. A dead teenager. And a ginormous red dragon. Yes. It was all coming back to her. I need a drink. A quiet groan passed through her lips as her headache dulled to a minor throb. A sigh and then, thank you, Inumaki-san. The white-haired man gestured lazily with his hand before pulling a piece of paper out of his front pocket and handing it to her. Sakura's eyebrows furrowed in confusion as her eyes slowly roamed along the parchment. Why? Odd. Emerald orbs rose from the parchment, centering on the young man before her. How long have you been scouting QAH? Tej shrugged his shoulders, signing with his hands on the exact amount of days he'd been stationed in QAH. 3 months. 3 months. At his nod, Sakura glanced back down at the paper. And you're absolutely positive about this? Tej nodded his head firmly, followed by a single word. Tuna. Sakura pursed her lips before glancing back towards the man. Why didn't you inform your superior? Or even make contact with Yasaka-sama? Sakura was bemused to see a splotch of red take over the boy's cheeks. As if embarrassed by the question, Tej signed slowly with his hands. I forgot. Yuji-kun and his team are busy searching for the remaining artifacts, and Maki-san and Panda are in Tokyo following a lead. I've been swamped with work. The medic snorted quietly as she folded the paper up and placed it in her pocket. Well then, I'll relieve you of your duty. Make sure that Yasaka-sama is informed about what you've found. It isn't a coincidence that those fallen angels are here. The white-haired teen saluted the medic before tilting his head and signing a question. Are you going to be okay? Sakura smiled at the boy's concern as she answered. I'll be fine, Inumaki-san. Just know that the Shinto pantheon has both of the heavenly dragons in their possession now. A smirk overtook her features as Tej's eyes widened in surprise. We have divine dividing and the boosted gear. At Sakura's nod, the boy tilted his head, slowly signing with his hand. You have one. Sakura winked in response. Tej said nothing in response, too shocked by the revelation that the yokai faction, and by proxy the Shinto pantheon, now was in possession of 2 of the strongest sacred gears in existence. And one of them was right here in front of him. Don't you have a report to give? Sakura asked in an amused tone. Get moving, Inumaki-kun. A dash of red spread through the boy's features as he bid a farewell to his superior. Hi. I'll be seeing you around, Sakura-sama. Tej disappeared in a burst of speed before Sakura could even hope to curb his formal title. Why does everyone call me that? Your leader holds you and your team in high regards, does she not? You should get used to it, partner. Quiet, you overgrown lizard. A small frown marred Suzuki's face as his main Jakyusharinon slowly deactivated. His ebony orb regarded the catatonic assassin with a minor look of disdain. This information was annoying. Whether it was true or not was up for debate, but it was most certainly going to cause trouble in Yasaka's inner circle. Again, it mattered little if the information he extracted from Marcus was true or not. The fact he had been paid to eliminate Yasaka's daughter was troubling in itself. One does not callously order such actions, nor would one do so without covering their tracks. Except it had happened. Marcus has been contracted with the sole purpose of eliminating Kunu. He had been paid a hefty amount to do so as well. Nearly $50 million to do so. That single fact was already out of the ordinary, considering Marcus Black was an infamous assassin in the Euro-Asian areas of the world. It wasn't completely out of the ordinary considering the fact that the man himself was American, and it would only be normal that his payment be dealt in American currency. But it merited suspicion due to the fact that Marcus hadn't actually stepped into U.S. soil for the last 5 years. He had been in Tokyo the last 2 years, completing various contracts and missions. 3 years before that he had been in Russia, going undercover shadowing over various factions that were causing trouble and eliminating some big fish while he was at it. Odd. Odd indeed. Disregarding the currency as something merely being coincidental, which Suzuki disbelieved in regardless due to his tenure as a shinobi, an actual name had been given from his contract. A name that was very familiar, all things considered. Yuijo Suzume. The Tokyo billionaire that Kakashi had assassinated a week or so ago. He had unknowingly trafficked 2 young yokais who so happened to be related to one of Yasaka's inner council members. Now, why was it odd? Well, dead men tell no tales. Yuijo was a man that had been unaware of the supernatural world. Whether that statement was true or not really didn't matter. Why? Because as far as Kakashi was concerned, Yuijo only dealt with drug trafficking and prostitution. And Sasuke wholeheartedly believed in Kakashi's information-gathering skills, so that was a moot point. The billionaire man had never dipped his toes in the assassination business, and that's what truly stood out for Sasuke. A billionaire he was, but a moron he was not. The hitman business was a tricky and dangerous business. One does not meddle with vipers and cobras and expect to not be bitten. So that begged the question. Why would Yuijo, if he had even done so, target Yasaka's child? A woman who he had little to zero knowledge of. A woman that would have flown completely under Yuijo's radar. Moriso, how would Yuijo have known that Yasaka had a child to begin with? How would he have known that Kuno's bodyguards had been slowly relieved of their duty due to Naruto's sudden appearance? It wasn't like Yasaka was a celebrity, flaunting her image and plastering it on billboards for all to see. The woman preferred to keep to herself, and while she treated the entirety of the yokai faction as her own family, it had always felt like she kept them at arm's reach. Which didn't surprise Sasuke all that much, considering how politics worked. Nasty business and whatnot. Nothing added up, and it only pointed to someone being careless and not bothering to cover their tracks. Had he not been a shinobi with years of training in subterfuge, he'd have merely glanced over this small fact, assuming Yuijo was wealthy enough and had enough pull in Japan to be aware of the supernatural. It wasn't completely unheard of for wealthy and influential billionaires to be aware of the supernatural world. Individuals such as Bill Gates and Elon Musk were of the few individuals with this knowledge. At least those were the ones that Sasuke was aware of. But that was neither here nor there. It was obvious, not really, that something was wrong. And Sasuke was just going to assume that someone close to Yasaka had ordered the hit. After all, how else would an infamous assassin breach through Kyoto's barrier without alerting the dozens of yokai that monitored the signatures of individuals coming in and out of the city? The yokai barrier team was incredibly meticulous, and considering that Naruto had offered his help in making the barrier even stronger just led credence to his belief that someone close to Yasaka was the culprit. A low sigh escaped Sasuke as he rubbed the bridge of his nose. Naruto was not going to take this information well. Sasuke pulsed his chakra in a familiar pattern, alerting Naruto that he was ready to speak to him. Before the teen could even react, Naruto seemed to just appear at his side. Even after having seen the boy and his father use the technique, Sasuke was still unnerved by the high ration. Naruto could have attacked him and he'd be defenseless against it. It was just too fast to even react to. Even Madara had fell victim to the Hiraishin's instantaneous travel, and that man had every Baijuyu in his body. Ignoring the instinct and urge to attack Naruto purely off of reflex, Sasuke turned his head to stare at his friend. You might want to sit down. The ground beneath Naruto's feet lurched as a makeshift dune of mud and soil formed under him. The Jinchuriki slowly sat down on the mud wall, ignoring Sasuke's annoyed expression. Annoying prick. Sasuke muttered quietly, knowing well that Naruto had heard him. I've come to my own conclusion regarding why Kuno was targeted. And you won't like it. Naruto said nothing, only raising his eyebrow in acknowledgement. There's a rat in that circle. Sasuke noted that Naruto's features tightened. Nothing more, nothing less. That wasn't necessarily the reaction he had been expecting. Naruto wore his emotions on his sleeve. He was very in tune with his emotions and was normally incredibly easy to read. Do you have any clues as to who? Naruto questioned quietly, eyes firmly fixated on Marcus' unconscious body. None. Naruto pursed his lips for a moment, eyes briefly bleeding crimson. I'll be handling it. The blonde teen slowly fell from atop his mud wall, landing softly beside Sasuke. Anything else? He asked quietly. Sasuke was tempted to question why his friend was behaving differently, but chose better. This was the first time he was seeing this side of Naruto. Sasuke doubted that Naruto wasn't angry. He knew his friend and knew him well. Other than locations, various targets, and other smaller contracts. No. The Jinchuriki nodded his head before taking a step towards Marcus' unconscious body. He stared at the comatose man before slowly raising his right hand and extending his index finger. Red viscous chakra slowly bubbled along Naruto's arm, traveling towards his index finger. The chakra engulfed his appendage, causing his fingernails to sharpen and extend in length. Sasuke had yet to actually see Naruto kill someone. For as long as he knew the boy, he had never heard of or seen the boy take a life. Sasuke assumed that Naruto hadn't the stomach or will to commit such a heinous act. He was proven wrong nearly a second later as Naruto's index finger pierced Marcus' forehead, sinking deep into his skull with a wet squelching sound. Kakashi observed the individuals in Yasaka's council chambers with a disinterested gaze. His trusty, new, hentai manga was clutched in his left hand, erotic scenes ignored for the time being. Rarely would he ever choose to ignore his erotica, but this was important. Sasuke had deduced the perpetrator behind Marcus' contract. Well, not necessarily, but close enough. According to Sasuke, Naruto was going to handle it. Which could mean a plethora of things. Sasuke had informed him that his favorite troublemaker had finally taken a life. It honestly surprised Kakashi. Naruto had never verbally stated his disposition on those who take lives, they were shinobi after all, but he had also never done the deed himself. One could argue that Naruto had killed Kakazu. But they'd be wrong considering he himself had ended Kakazu after the man had been severely injured by Naruto's imperfect Rasen Shuriken. White Zetsu didn't necessarily count even if they had been human at one point, though that was a debate all in itself. Naruto had never truly taken a human life during his tenure as a shinobi, choosing instead to use his words to his advantage. Force was obviously used when needed, like Obito and Pain for example, but he hadn't killed those men either. His student had finally taken a life. A measure of pride and guilt tugged at Kakashi's heart due to it. He was proud that Naruto was capable of a more direct approach to those who would harm the people he cares about, but Naruto was like a little brother to Kakashi. He heavily slacked on his duties as a teacher and that blame was placed firmly on his shoulders, but it still didn't feel right to him. A low sigh escaped Kakashi as his eyes stared at his manga, ignoring the erotic scenes due to his thoughts. His feelings didn't matter because at the end of the day Naruto would do what he believed was right, and make no mistake, Naruto was a good kid with a good head on his shoulders. Kakashi would follow Naruto to hell and back, and all the boy would have to do was ask. But as the boy's self-imposed big brother, Kakashi would have a chat with the boy when this was all over. Talking a human life was not something anyone could do. The minutes continued to drift on as Kakashi lost himself to his thoughts. The minutes turned into an hour as the room slowly filled with Yasaka's inner council members. Naruto had requested his presence in the room and Kakashi had an inkling as to what his troublemaking student would do. After another 30 or so minutes, Naruto entered the room with Yasaka only half a step behind. Unlike other times when they'd enter the room with one another, Naruto was leading Yasaka instead of the other way around. Peculiar but not outlandish. The room quieted as each individual took their seats, backs straight and eyes focused on Yasaka along with Naruto. Kakashi's ebony orbs swept through the room, focusing on each individual and searching for any micro-expressions and or subtle twitches. Finding nothing that would incriminate and or pinpoint the rat in the room, Kakashi pocketed his book and stood to his full height. As you may or may not know, several hours ago my daughter was targeted by an assassin. Yasaka stated firmly, slowly taking a seat towards the end of the table. The attempt failed and the assassin has been dealt with. Silence greeted her statement. Not entirely surprising considering what had happened. Some were shocked to find out and others seemed concerned. I am no stranger to this game myself. But my child was targeted. The woman's face tightened angrily, sharp teeth baring for the briefest of moments as she locked eyes with every single individual in the room. I have been nothing but patient and kind during my tenure as a yokai faction leader. I put the need of my people ahead of my own ambitions. Of my own feelings. Of my own time. Yasaka's right hand slowly descended upon the mahogany table, fingernails tapping rhythmically against the aged wood. I am disgusted by the actions of those who would wish to hurt me, targeting my own child. My own flesh and blood. She snarled angrily as her chakra shook the room, voice raising several octaves. And the one responsible is seated in this very room. Following her outburst was her fist descending directly through the table, shattering it like glass. Wood chippings exploded throughout the room, followed by several exclamations of surprise and shock. Silence. Yasaka roared angrily, golden tails swaying erratically in the air. The coward who would betray my trust and target the one thing I love more than anything will pay. The Kyuubi stood to her feet, chakra weighing down each individual in the room as she exerted her presence. I shall give you one chance to admit to your treachery. Your punishment will be lenient if you come forth and expose yourself. Silence. Whether that be out of fear, shock, or guilt was up in the air. After several seconds of silence, the yokai leader snarled angrily. Have it your way then. Turning her head towards Naruto, she gestured quietly. You may begin, Naruto. The aforementioned teen glanced towards the irate woman, offering her a brief nod. Cerulean orbs met Kakashi's ebony orbs and a silent message was conveyed. One that Kakashi instantly understood. The Jonin's gloved hand made contact with the wall behind him. A brief flare of chakra alerted everyone to Kakashi. When the room's occupants turned their attention on the man, they were surprised to see several kanji and what looked like a barrier seal spread throughout the room. Can't have any of you leaving now, can we? Kakashi asked rhetorically, amusement littering his tone. Well, you could try. But you wouldn't get that far. Naruto cleared his throat immediately after Kakashi's words. After gaining the attention of the room, Naruto gestured with his hand. We're going to play a simple game. I am going to ask each of you a question. You will answer it truthfully. Simple, right? Let's begin. Naruto's gaze flicked towards the youngest yokai in the room. A single strive placed him in front of the woman who met his gaze, and though she displayed a degree of anxiety and nervousness, she never strayed away from his eyes. The Juobijin Hierarchy raised his right hand towards the woman, displaying an open palm. I'm going to place my hand on your chest and ask you a question. Naruto placed his palm directly over where the woman's heart rested before staring into her eyes. His other hand slowly rose, palm splayed upward facing the ceiling. Yaoyorozu-san, were you involved in the assassination contract that led Marcus Black to target Kunu? The woman's expression shifted in confusion for a brief moment as a wave of chakra swept through her body. Had she not been hyper-focused on every little detail about the man and his question, then she might have missed the sensation. Her mane of wild and untamed hair shook as she answered. No, I did not. Cerulean gazed into charcoal for several seconds until... Okay. Naruto's palm vacated its place upon the woman's chest before he shifted his attention to a different individual. While many were confused about the process, others quietly murmured to one another. And so the blonde teen circled the room, asking the same question and repeating the same gesture with both hands to every individual in the room. When reaching the eighth individual in the room, he asked once again. Yamabako-san, were you involved in the assassination contract that led Marcus Black to target Kunu? The broad-shouldered yokai narrowed his eyes, staring into Naruto's cerulean orbs. What if I don't want to answer? What will you do then? His tone was one of genuine curiosity. Naruto was quiet for a moment before lazily shrugging his shoulder. Nothing. He answered rather bluntly. The older yokai tilted his head curiously before deigning a response to Naruto's previous question. No, I was not. Naruto stared into the man's eyes, slowly nodding his head. Why did you ask what I would do? Yamabako merely tilted his head, pondering his answer. Curiosity, I suppose. A second turned to 2. And 2 turned to 10. And then 10 turned to a minute. Several of the elders began to quietly murmur amongst one another as Naruto's palm remained glued to Yamabako's chest. Naruto's head tilted as he finally spoke over the tense silence. Was it this same curiosity that caused you to target Kunu? The teen raised a single eyebrow as he continued. Or do you wish to cause unnecessary conflict within the Shinto pantheon? The elder's eyes grew harsh as he responded. You dare accuse me of targeting a mere child for enjoyment? A wave or chakra rolled off the man as he snarled angrily. You question my loyalty to the Shinto pantheon, boy. Before Yamabako could continue his angry rant, Naruto's chakra rolled off his body in waves, blanketing the room and shaking the entire building. Naruto's chakra caused the man's legs to buckle as he fell to the floor on both knees. Incandescent colors seemed to emanate from the very pores of Naruto's body, painting him in a brilliant cascade of bright colors. The pressure continued to grow and grow, shaking the foundation of the building to the point of near collapse. And when the building reached its near breaking point, it stopped. The pressure vacated. The thick smog of power evaporated. Naruto's eyes traveled downward to meet Yamabako's terrified and odd expression. His left hand slowly traveled towards his face, index finger nearing his lips as he quietly hushed the man. SHHHHHHHHHHHHHHHHH. Use your inside voice when speaking to me. Naruto's left hand slowly vacated away from his mouth. Bending his knee, Naruto sank down to Yamabako's level, eyes never once leaving the man. You are a liar, Yamabako. The Jinhuriki continued softly. I have the unique ability to sense negative emotions. I tend to dull this power given to me due to the influx of information from those around me. It does not feel good when hundreds of thousands of negative feelings, thoughts, and actions invade your mind at the same time every second of the day. Kyoto, Japan is my home. And threats to my home will be dealt with swiftly. I lost everything once before. I'm not going to risk that again. Ever. A yellow flash appeared in Naruto's left hand followed by a wet gurgling noise courtesy of Yamabako. The palm that had been glued to Yamabako's chest finally pulled away, revealing the hydration mark. Naruto slowly rose to his feet before turning towards the rest of the room and holding out his left hand for all of the individuals to see. Let this be a warning to all of you. The yokai factions, be they the west, east, north, or south, are all under one banner, the Shinto Pantheon. Naruto's eyes shifted to Yamabako as he continued. Traitors have no place among us. Japan is our home. You don't destroy your homes, now do you? Let this action today be a reminder and a warning. The Jinhuriki slowly dropped the object he had taken from Yamabako. The item fell to the floor in wet squelch, staining the wooden floors crimson. Yamabako's breathing grew ragged and harsh as his vision began to slowly blacken. His eyes grew glassy as they focused on the object that Naruto had dropped near his feet. A wet wheeze escaped his lips as his right hand tried to reach for said object on the floor. Another wet cough caused his body to fall forward, head slamming into the hardwood floors. Yamabako drew his last breath, dying in a pool of his own blood. His outstretched arm was merely inches away from the object that kept him alive. Fingers desperately seeking the organ that supplied with him life. The man's heart ceased to continue thumping, finally cementing Yamabako's death. Avoiding the issue doesn't solve it, Naruto. He was half tempted to roll his eyes at Kurama's words. The only thing stopping Naruto from doing so was the fact that his partner was correct. It wasn't solving anything, and at this point he was avoiding the talk off pure principle. So instead, he deflected and downplayed it. Want me to cry about it? Tell you all these conflicting emotions about what I've done? Is that what you want? He responded in a snarky manner. If Kurama was bothered by his words, then the beast did little to show it. I want you to acknowledge it. The thin patience that Naruto had was on the cusp of being snapped. I already have. It isn't going to change anything. Again, Kurama did not seem fazed by the boy's words. The fox's tone remained even as it responded. Could have fooled me. A pause. By all means, continue lying to yourself. I'm positive that's the best course of action. Anger blossomed once more in Naruto's chest, and he oh so badly wished to lash out because of it. But then he'd just be proving Kurama's point. I'm not going to sit here and pester you about opening up. It isn't my job to do so. However, I will pester you when you are being an idiot. And right now, you are being one. Okay. Naruto snapped angrily. You know how I feel. I feel like shit. Cerulean orbs became slick with tears as he stared at the night sky from his vantage point atop the compound's largest tower. I took not one but 2 lives. 2. Who am I to decide who lives or dies? I'm not a fucking god. I'm not some omniscient being that decides someone's fate. So why the hell was I the one to make that decision? Shame and guilt tugged at Naruto's heart as his fingers clenched his pants. It makes me sick. I told myself that I wouldn't abuse my power. That I wouldn't become someone who would just take life so callously. And now look at me. Deciding who gets to die simply because I felt like it. Kurama listened to Naruto's words, silently contemplating what to say. This was by no means an area of expertise that the beast excelled in. Kurama was not a human and therefore believed that any matters regarding what mortals do and don't do, was not its business. Thankfully, the Kyuubi did not have to do so. Is that why you're up here sulking? Kami, you haven't changed a bit. Still that naive, little child on the docks. Sasuke's monotonous voice resounded out beside the teen. Shut up, you stupid bastard. Naruto immediately snapped in retaliation. His head snapped up towards Sasuke, pinning the teen with a vicious stare. I'm not like you. We don't think the same way. You may be fine with taking someone's life and not thinking about it, but I can't do that. If the Uchiha was bothered by his friend's words, then he did nothing to show it. Instead, the ebony-haired teen turned his attention out towards Kyoto. Who said you had to be fine with taking someone's life? Sasuke questioned quietly, briefly stunning Naruto. Those words never left my mouth. I called you naive because you are. But there is also nothing wrong with how you think. Sasuke slowly unsheathed his kusanagi, placing the flat end of the blade along his right palm. He gazed into the sword's reflection for a moment before continuing. You are naive because you believe everyone is capable of second chances. You give the benefit of the doubt no matter the individual. I'd even go as far as to say that you'd have even given Kaguya a second chance. When Naruto didn't retort his claim, Sasuke nodded his head. However, not everyone is capable of being given a second chance. There are those in this world, and even our own one, that were not worthy of being given a second chance. You may disagree with me, but it is an opinion, no matter how wrong it is. Many believe that you cannot judge others' opinions because they are just that, opinions. But I disagree. An opinion can also be outright stupid. Sasuke shifted the blade in his hand, placing it down his line of sight, staring down the weapon as if it were a rifle. An example is someone who would hold hate in their heart for another individual based solely off the color of their skin. They may try to justify their prejudices with stereotypical evidence and events, but that does not change the fact that their way of thinking is idiotic. Sasuke glanced down at his friend, noticing that the teen's attention was centered directly on him. It was slightly unnerving to some degree. Usually Sasuke was the one listening to someone lecture him about life and perspective. How the turntables turn. Or whatever the saying was. Take my kusanagi for example. He raised the blade towards Naruto's direction. It is a double-edged blade, meaning no matter which way I decide to attack, I will injure whoever is on the other side of it. However, he trailed off before flipping the blade to show the flat end of the sword. I am also capable of using the flat end of the blade to render my enemies unconscious. They say to treat your blade as an extension of your own self. How you strike, where you strike and who you strike are all indicative of who you are as a person. The blade is capable of maiming and killing, yes, but it is also capable of rendering someone unconscious. The Uchiha let his statement hang in the air for a couple of seconds before slowly sheathing the weapon. You are the same as any weapon, Naruto. The only difference between yourself and a blade is that you are capable of individual thought. And how you choose to use those thoughts, and actions, is entirely up to you. But in doing so, you must also realize that not everyone around you, including yourself, will be comfortable with the decisions you make. That is life. Silence reigned after Sasuke's long-winded speech, and if he was being honest, it was kind to comfortable. He wasn't the most emotionally in-tuned individual, but he could offer his own perspective and beliefs. He himself had taken plenty of lives, and while not all of them were justified, it didn't mean that they didn't affect him. Sasuke's quest for vengeance and power had led him down a dark path, and he had swam through a river of blood just to kill his elder brother. Looking back on who he used to be made Sasuke sick to his stomach at times. And if he was being completely honest, he didn't feel like he deserved a second chance at life. But his late-night talks with Kurika had helped ease that way of thinking. She was annoying and overly bubbly, but he also found comfort in her presence. He was definitely aware of this and the potential consequences of what could happen regarding the woman, but that was a conversation for another time. One he wanted to avoid. So lost in his own thoughts he nearly missed when Naruto finally spoke. Thanks, Sasuke. The Jinchuriki sniffed quietly, rubbing his eyes to prevent the tears that wished to fall. You know, sometimes you can be helpful. Who would have thought? He chuckled lightheartedly after his words, earning an annoyed scoff from Sasuke. Yeah, whatever. Just don't be a dumbass anymore. Having said his piece, Sasuke leaped down from atop the tower, landing without a sound. He took a few steps before stopping in his tracks and turning his head towards one of the various dark corners. Kakashi's form was barely visible under the shadows of one of the buildings. Couldn't have said it better myself. You've come a long way, Sasuke. The Uchiha was silent for a moment before nodding his head and disappearing in a burst of speed. Kakashi stared at the boy's previous spot before glancing up towards Naruto's position. While Sasuke had given the boy a clearer perspective and philosophical view, Kakashi would still offer his own advice. The lanky Jonin hopped up towards Naruto's position, plopping himself down beside his student and speaking. Yo. And they would talk for the next several hours, bonding and speaking about the subjects they failed to tackle during their time as shinobi. It was therapy for Kakashi and soothing for Naruto. This is troubling, Surtsks. A handsome, green-haired man stated quietly. The Shinto pantheon seems to be expanding. The information from your younger sister and Seraphils is also worrying. The man named Surtsks rubbed his chin as he stared at nothing in particular. Seated around him were the other three Satans that ruled over the devil faction in the underworld, he himself being the current Lucifer. Their movement seems to be aggressive, but... His blue-green eyes narrowed for a moment before shifting towards the current Leviathan, Seraphal. Your sister informed you that this Sasuke individual seemed to radiate an almost divine aura. The ebony-haired woman, who resembled a child with disproportionate breasts, replied in an uncharacteristically serious manner. Sonatan compared his presence to you, Surtsks. She even believes he might be above you. A yawn escaped through the lips of one of the men, this particular man being bald with a goatee. If this information wasn't so important, I'd be taking a nap. Quit your antics, Falbium. The green-haired Satan replied with a roll of the eyes. This is incredibly serious. One false move could result in a war. While the information we have isn't necessarily concrete, we cannot afford to tread in water that may or may not be deep. Especially on Shinto territory. The yokai would never willingly traverse into the underworld. I don't fancy an all-out war with the Shinto gods, let alone an unknown variable like this Sasuke individual. Silence met Ajuka's words. A tenseness permeated the air after his statement, and each Satan certainly agreed with their fellow Satan's words. Have you managed to secure an audience with any of the yokai faction leaders, Seraphal? Surtsks questioned curiously, cutting through the tension easily. The usually peppy woman deflated at her fellow Satan's words. The only response I've been given was from West Yokai faction's leader, Yasaka. She agreed to a meeting but on her own terms. Understandable, but... Feisty woman that one. Falbium commented offhandedly. Our informants have been rather lacking in the information department. The main cities of the yokai faction leaders have upped their security. Getting information is like pulling teeth with your fingers. The terms? Ajuka questioned with a raised eyebrow. At his question, Seraphal grimaced heavily. Takamagahara. The remaining Satans all shared a similar grimace to Seraphal. Takamagahara was the abode of the heavenly gods in the Shinto pantheon. Those like Amaterasu, the Koda Amatsukami, and various other powerful deities belonging to the pantheon called Takamagahara their home. That is, troublesome. Surtsks responded quietly. Will she accept no other alternatives? None. Seraphal responded immediately. However, Yasaka has recently sent a delegate to handle affairs between the yokai and devils. The delegate will be stationed in Kyoa and will operate and watch over the city. Surtsks sighed quietly, rubbing his forehead to alleviate the compounding stress on his mind. My wife has also informed me that the delegate might have been injured and or attacked when she arrived in Kyoa. What? Ajuka exclaimed in shock. Who and how? This wasn't good. The consequences from this could immediately ignite a conflict between the Shinto pantheon and the devils. Surtsks sighed heavily, once more rubbing his face. I haven't gotten all the details, but rest assured that Rias and Sana were not the cause. I will find out more soon. This incident seemed to occur just last night. A rogue fallen angel seemed to have infiltrated Kyoa, and this rogue eliminated an innocent human. This is just one headache after another. Falbium groaned. What are we to do? For now, we have to wait and see until the delegate meets with Sana and Rias. If we move now, it'll be viewed as aggressive. We're already treading thin ice as we speak. We must move with caution. Surtsk released a heavy sigh before turning towards Sirafal and continuing. In the meantime, accept the invitation from Yasaka. We can discuss further afterwards. The childlike Satan nodded her head. Hein. Meeting adjourned. Yasaka gently stroked her daughter's hair, holding the girl close to her. Kunu's breathing was soft as the girl unconsciously snuggled deeper into the embrace of her mother. As Yasaka continued her gentle ministrations, she couldn't help but feel guilty as she gently stroked her daughter's hair. She knew it was irrational, but she felt like a failure as a mother. What little free time she had during her day was devoted to her daughter, but it felt like it was never enough. Some days they'd barely even have the time to share breakfast with one another. It gnawed at her both physically and mentally. There were some days where she absolutely loathed her position as one of the yokai faction leaders. Only because it prevented her from enjoying her time with her daughter. It was bad enough that Kunu's father, and Yasaka absolutely despised using that word to describe Kunu's sperm donor, had left of his own accord, but to never at least make an effort to get to know his flesh and blood. It infuriated the woman. Yasaka may not be the perfect mother, but she made time for her daughter and put the girl's needs above her own. It was incredibly difficult to juggle her time as a leader and a mother, but damn it if she didn't try. I'm so sorry, Kunu-chan. I'm trying. I really am. A lone tear slid down her cheek as she caressed her daughter fiercely. Please don't be angry with me. Had she lost her daughter today? The woman shook her head furiously. No. Bad thoughts. Dark ones. I doubt Kunu-chan would be angry with you. Yasaka's eyes widened at the voice, head snapping up to come face to face with Naruto. She hadn't even heard him come in. The Kyuubi sniffled quietly before quickly wiping the tears from her eyes. I didn't hear you come in, Naruto-kun. She sniffled once more before laughing in a self-deprecating manner. Kami, I must look like a mess. Forgive me. A gentle smile formed on Naruto's face as he took a seat on the woman's bed. You have nothing to apologize for, Yasaka-chan. His left hand slowly descended upon Kunu's head, gently stroking the little Kyuubi's hair. Do you want to talk about it? Yasaka was silent as she watched the teen show gentle care to her daughter. No. At least not right now, if that's okay with you. Naruto glanced towards the woman as he replied. Of course. Whenever you're ready. The Kyuubi wiped her face one last time before speaking. And you? How are you doing? Kakashi-san informed me that you've never spilled blood. Naruto briefly paused his ministrations before sighing quietly. I'm doing good. Sasuke and I had a talk and he gave me a new perspective. Also had a talk with Kakashi about other things. And I think I'm gonna be okay. That's good to hear. Her left hand descended upon Naruto's thigh and she relished in the way he briefly tensed. So. Care to spend the night? A dash of red painted Naruto's face for a moment before he coughed awkwardly. Well, I wouldn't be opposed to that. His offhand came to rub at the back of his neck as he continued. Just you know. I've never really done something like this. Yasaka giggled quietly as she stroked the boy's thigh. Teasing the boy was so much fun. I'm sure Kunu-chan would love to wake up to her father, wouldn't you agree? Naruto proceeded to mutter and trip over his words of the woman's words, still not used to such open displays of affection and teasing. Come. Yasaka playfully patted the spot on the opposite side of Kunu's beam sleeping form. Lay with us. And lay with them he did. Chapter 9, A Grotesque Proposition. Sasuke had always had on a chip on his shoulder. Growing up he had been vigorously compared to his elder brother. Itachi was not only a prodigy in the shinobi arts but a once-in-a-lifetime genius with talent beyond comprehension. His skill, dedication, motivation, and overall love of Konoha had been pushed above the norm. Itachi had been a perfectionist and anything less was seen as a failure. Sasuke was of the same belief but was incapable of producing the same results as his elder brother. He had talent. He had drive. But he was not Itachi and he'd never be Itachi. Fugaku had demanded more than Sasuke could give. Resentment pooled along with recognition. Recognition that he so badly wished to receive from his father. There was a saying amongst the Uchiha. One as old as time that predated even the great Madara Uchiha. Pride bleeds vanity if one does not understand their mind. Sasuke's clan was a prideful one. Blinded by emotions, driven mad for those they've loved. Spiteful and hateful individuals with a mental illness that could rip the world asunder if given a chance. He had fallen into the same cycle that all-powerful Uchiha had fell victim to. The curse of the Uchiha clan was but a whisper, a relic of old passed down from generation to generation. The clan would kill, maim, and dismember their own fellow brothers and sisters. All for power. The very same power that had plagued the elemental nations for thousands of years. One could argue that the elemental nations was forever destined to be bathed in blood when Hagoromo Otsutsuki was born. And they'd be half right. Sasuke was the transmigration of Indra Otsutsuki, the original sage of Six Paths' son. One of them at least, with Naruto being the transmigration of the other son, Asura Otsutsuki. Sasuke personally believed that the elemental nations had been cursed the second that Hagoromo chose Asura as his sole successor. Indra was a prideful and arrogant man, naturally gifted in using the power that flowed through his father's veins. Whereas Asura was the exact opposite. And thus started the thousand-year feud that would bleed into the elemental nations, forever drowning it in a sea of sorrow and hate. And now it ceased to exist. Sasuke's sword pierced through the abdomen of yet another unfortunate spy belonging to some yokai upstart from the East faction. 3 Tomos spun lazily, gazing upon the unassuming man with boredom. Rat. A simple tug of the arm caused the man's body to split down the middle, spilling blood in a gruesome fashion. What had once started off as a decent stress relief was slowly becoming something annoying. More and more of these vermin were entering Kyoto with each passing day. Their numbers only seemed to increase, and while it wasn't cause for major concern, it was still an issue. An annoying issue, at that. If only Yasaka would give the orders to eliminate the group at the head, then he'd not have to waste his time with such trivial work. And though Sasuke could absolutely do so without nary an issue, he held a certain amount of respect for Yasaka. He'd not act unless given deliberate orders from the woman. While it would grate on his nerves for the time being, he'd comply. If for Naruto's sake. The annoying bastard was likely proud that he, Sasuke, had not gone off the deep end, sending a meteor directly on top of the cretins that dared to ploy against the yokai factions. Sighing quietly to himself, Sasuke rotated his kusanagi to the side, flicking the excess blood off his blade before subtly flipping it in a reverse grip. Sasuke's Rinnegan glowed for a moment, spewing black flames along the body of the spy, erasing the evidence of the man ever existing. With his blade facing behind him, it took only a simple application of chakra for the blade to extend faster than the speed of the sound. Orochimaru's former blade sank deep into the abdomen of the man who thought they were stealthy enough to attack from his blind side. The Uchiha's head turned a fraction to gaze at the individual he had stabbed before sensing chakra. He watched with a minor amount of interest as the man he had stabbed slowly dissolve, similar to Sai's ink jutsu. The hidden spy continued to melt and dissolve before disappearing entirely. Sasuke, while not outwardly showing it, was impressed, if only a little, by the display. He had extended his sword faster than most could react to. Only an individual possessing a decent amount of speed and reaction time could have hoped to dodge that. Strange, even more so, considering the man's chakra wasn't necessarily impressive. Though that could be in part due to the nature of the individual. Not every powerful individual would be like himself or Naruto. They were practically beacons of light for any individual that could sense chakra. Wide-scale destruction was not the only factor in determining an individual's prowess. You were just as likely to die to an assassination in the dead of night as you were to a mountain-sized boulder dropping atop your head, courtesy of an underpowered Tenge Shinsei. Retracting the blade of Kusanagi, Sasuke glanced along the area trying to sense the individual. It was strange. Their signature was everywhere and yet nowhere. A wide-scale concealment technique? An unheard of sacred gear? Illusions were thrown out the window due to his visual prowess. If Sasuke were to ever be caught in an illusion, he had given Naruto his permission to slit his throat. No self-respecting Uchiha with a Mangekyou Sharingan was allowed to be caught in an illusion. So who was this individual? You are full of wrath and anger, no. Sasuke paused as a feminine voice reverberated through his mind. This was a kami. How right you are. Following her voice was a cacophony of laughter that nearly made Sasuke ill. Tell me, O great and vengeful child, how does one such as yourself resist the call of violence? An insidious chuckle followed the woman's voice. Surely you do not mean to conceal these emotions. A frown marred Sasuke's face, and when he blinked, he came face to face with a grotesque-looking creature. For it could not be anything even remotely human-looking. Though the creature shared several similarities to that of a human female, she was anything but human. A beastly head with a pair of long and disfigured ears, giant nose, and gigantic fangs stared back at him. Mangled hair like decaying straw fell down the beast's head. Ignoring the temptation to curl his nose in disgust, Sasuke tilted his head and replied. It would be wise to stay out of my mind. Once again that disgusting and grotesque laugh cackled in his mind. Or what, child? You will slay me? I beseech you to try, for I will come back reborn and anew. You are not that of divinity. Your power, impressive as it is, does not affect one such as I. This time though, Sasuke's nose did curl in disgust, and sensing no form of deceit, replied tersely, Who are you? That same cackle reverberated from the beast, causing her beastly head to shake and convulse. Why, you gaze upon none other than the mother of all yokai, disobedient and troublesome. The motherless parent-child of Susanoo himself, Amino. Recognition finally dawned in Sasuke's eyes, recognizing the kami. The woman that gave birth to the more negative yokai, Tengu, and Amino in Japan. Said to be the amalgamation of Susanoo's ferocious spirit that he then proceeded to vomit out. A troublesome kami known for manipulating humans' emotions and possessing the hearts of man. Frown growing larger, Sasuke narrowed his gaze. What do you want? He asked impatiently. I've no time for your petty mind games. I see now why Susanoo respects you. The same arrogance and pride flows freely through your veins. A cackle left her throat. It is no wonder Susanoo informed me to steer clear from you. Sasuke's eyes tightened at the statement, annoyance flowing through his veins as the kami continued to harp about Susanoo. Leave. If all you plan to do is annoy me, then I will send you back to Takamagahara. That mangled and dirty hair swiveled as the creature tilted its distorted head. Such impatience. Children these days know not the virtue of being respectful. No matter. Amino cackled once more as she glided along the concrete, her body moving with an alien-like gait. I come with an offer, young one. I'm sure it is something that a wrathful individual such as yourself would behold. Sasuke was half tempted to burn the kami where she stood, uncaring of the repercussions that would surely follow for attacking a kami unprovoked, regardless of affiliation and dislike. And that offer is? He questioned calmly, masking his distaste and annoyance. That is more like it. Her smug tone nearly caused Sasuke to conjure his Susanoo just to spear her with an Amaterasu-coated sword. I have been watching you, child. Interested in the emotions that you bury deep within you. I have use of them. His frown slowly tapered off into a full-blown glare, Rinnegan glowing dangerously as his left hand sparked with Raiden chakra. I'm no one's tool. Leave. Before I kill you. An unfathomable amount of chakra sprang to life around Sasuke, spreading throughout the entirety of Kyoto. A malevolent smog of energy coated the boy's body, manifesting into a ginormous humanoid samurai. The sky darkened tremendously, followed by the cacophony of thunder. Droplets of rain began to drop with flashes of lightning descending all across the city of Kyoto. Amino did not shy away from the display of power, nor did she cringe. If anything, the creature seemed almost elated. Which in turn only further angered Sasuke. The Uchiha was mere nanoseconds away from striking the kami down where she stood. He however was unable to do so as a golden pillar of chakra appeared before his Susanoo, followed by the familiar roar of the Kyuubi. Sasuke took one glance at Naruto's glowing form, making direct eye contact with him as he did. The gigantic form of the Kyuubi loomed over Amino, the glowing beast staring down at the kami with its teeth bared. Whoever you are, you need to leave. Now. Naruto spoke through the avatar of Kurama, slowly descending through the translucent chakra amalgamation of his Baiju. He landed without a sound, his 9 Gudadama spinning hypnotically behind him. I won't be asking twice. Vacate Kyoto immediately and return to Takamagahara. Amanosaku seemed to consider the newcomer for a moment before cackling loudly, causing Naruto's features to harden further. Yes. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. You both shall do just well. The kami are restless. Her voice rose an octave, taking on a manic tone to it as she gestured wildly, disfigured limbs stretching awkwardly. Your names are spoken through Takamagahara. Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto's frown only deepened at the woman's tone. So this woman was a kami. He didn't recognize her though. She must not have been a major god then. Before he could reply though, the kami's disfigured body shifted in a grotesque manner, joints snapping and popping. You two cannot avoid it much longer. The heavens cry for you both. Salvation awaits. Chaos ensues. Revel in conflict and shed your humanity. Become my equal. Her manic tone seemed to only further disturb Sasuke and Naruto, evident by their expressions. The kami didn't bother waiting for a response, her cackling rising in volume as she slowly melted away. The two shinobi were quiet for several moments, the rumbling thunderstorm slowly tapering off into a dull downpour of rain. The lightning disappeared from the clouds along with Sasuke's titanic Susanoo. The Uchiha landed near his friend, watching as Kurama's avatar slowly dispersed from sight, breaking down into thousands of particles of light. The golden energy slowly swirled before funneling directly back into Naruto. Well. That was certainly ominous. Naruto stated unhelpfully, his Sage of Six Paths Kurama mode dissipating. Who was that, Sasuke? A minor kami, Amanosaku. He trailed off for a moment, gaze swiveling towards the darkened clouds. I'd write her words off as a deranged lunatic but... Naruto pushed. Sasuke's mismatched orbs narrowed for a moment before replying. I've learned to stop underestimating individuals I've perceived as weaker than me. How she worded that. This is going to spark something annoying. The blonde tilted his head towards the sky, seeing something that Sasuke clearly couldn't. We're being watched. I can't see them but I can sense them. A pause. What did she say to you to lose composure? You've gotten better at controlling yourself. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he glanced away from the sky. She came with an offer. Though that offer went unsaid. She claimed to have use of me. Knowing about his friend's vitriolic attitude towards being controlled or guided, Naruto nodded his head. I'll let Yasaka know. She'll most likely get in touch with Amaterasu. Maybe she'll know what's going on. Sasuke responded with a quiet grunt before sheathing his kusanagi with a quiet click. Let's go. Naruto stated, placing his hand on Sasuke's shoulder before teleporting them both away. As the Uchiha was teleported away, he couldn't help but fixate on the parting words from the deranged kami. Revel in conflict and shed your humanity. Become my equal. It left an uncomfortable feeling in his stomach, one that would plague his thoughts for the rest of the day. Even his time with Kurika could not staunch the unease that rested deep within him. Sakura sighed quietly as she sat at her temporary desk, within her temporary home. A day had passed since she sent Inumaki back to Kyoto to report his findings to Yasaka. Kyoto was slowly becoming an active hotspot for all things supernatural. According to Inumaki's findings, with the last 6 months the supernatural world seemed to spike in activity. Which wasn't necessarily a major cause for concern considering random spikes of activity were normal. However, the individual groups or factions was the cause for concern. While the devil faction held some form of power in Kyoto, the heiresses, there seemed to be activity from even the biblical side of things. That activity being from one of the more major branches of the Catholic Church. Odd considering their home turf was that of Italy. Why there seemed to be some subsection making moves in Kyoto was beyond Sakura's understanding. Kyoto did not possess anything of note for any groups of supernatural, even less so the Catholic Church. There had been no talks, at least according to Yasaka's debriefing, about the Catholic Church moving towards Japan. There was also the matter of the fallen angels recently settling down in Kyoto. Inumaki had noted their presence and had silently watched over their activity, explaining that the small group was more or less harmless and had yet to do anything during their 2-month tenure. That is until last night. Sakura glanced towards her right hand as she ceased her scribbling. Blood suddenly appeared on her hand, a figment of her imagination. The blood of the boy she couldn't save. When she blinked, the blood disappeared, never having been there in the first place. The medic sighed quietly to herself as she continued to finish up her own report of last night. How she eliminated the fallen angel, the death of an innocent teenager, and even her new companion. Once finishing up her report, the Pinkette turned on the TV in her room, idly listening to the news report of Issei's untimely death. Inumaki had informed her that one of the heiresses had appeared last night. Whether she was there for her own personal gain or because she wished to help was unknown to Sakura. Inumaki had made sure that once she was stable and safe, to venture out and make sure to clean the streets of any supernatural involvement. Upon arrival though, he had noted that it had already been taken care of and that Issei's body had been discovered by a passing couple, an ambulance being called shortly after. And now Sakura was listening to the police report. A gunshot wound had ended the life of a young teen, with no witnesses and no suspects to question. The medic shook her head quietly as she neatly stacked her papers together, separating the documents into different folders and binders. Upon stowing everything away into one of the desk drawers, Sakura slowly rose from her seat and stretched her joints and muscles. Her emerald orbs glanced towards the window that sat directly above her desk and pursed her lips as the sun began to slowly rise. She gathered her outfit for the day before feeling a wave of malevolent chakra flow through her. Sakura's eyes widened in surprise as her head snapped towards the direction of Kyoto, feeling Sasuke's chakra. While not an efficient sensor like Naruto and Sasuke, it was nearly impossible to not feel that wave of power. A moment passed by before she felt Naruto's chakra spike, countering and smothering the malevolent aura that Sasuke released. What? They better not be fighting. Her expression shifted angrily as she gathered her clothes, stripped out of her outfit, and stepped into the shower to bathe herself. As Sakura slowly walked through the small city of Kyoto, she made sure to keep an eye on her surroundings. She could no longer sense the small group of fallen angels in the town and pursed her lips at the thought of them fleeing or being dealt with. It wasn't out of the possibility that one of heiresses might have finally removed them. While unfortunate that an innocent teen had to die for something to finally be done, it was an issue that she'd bring directly up to them. But that conversation could wait until later when she inevitably spoke to them. Sensing two distinct presences behind her, the Pinkette pivoted on her heel, turning towards the two individuals who were most certainly devils. Sakura raised an eyebrow at the two females, easily recognizing the petite devil that Sasuke described. The girl's violet eyes sharpened almost immediately, subtly motioning towards her peerage member. The taller woman also wore glasses but sported a unique set of heterochromic eyes. Coming to a stop, Sana offered a brief bow with her queen mimicking the motion. Greetings. I assume that you are the yokai representative sent by Lady Yasaka. Sana took a shaky inhale, right hand trembling for the briefest of moments. Welcome to Kyoto. A brief pause. I heard from Gremory-san that an incident occurred last night. Sakura eyed the anxious girl with an indecipherable expression upon her face. This girl seemed terrified, for one reason or another. She did a good job at masking it, but Sakura saw through the facade quite easily. A gentle smile fixed its way to Sakura's face as she returned the girl's bow. Sakura Harano. The heiress's eyes widened for a moment before stuttering quietly. Sana Satrai, and this is my queen, Tsubaki Shinra. I apologize for my manners. Sakura's eyebrows knit together for a moment before waving the girl's apology off. It's quite alright, Satrai-san. If you would. Sakura motioned with her hand, gesturing for the heiress to walk with her. You are correct about an incident happening last night, though I will address the situation once we all sit together. I do hope that's acceptable. Of course, Harano-san. The Satrai heiress was quick to respond, fingers twitching against one another. The girl immediately ceased her nervous tick, clasping her hands behind her back as she walked alongside Sakura. How are you finding Kyoto? Trying to ease the girl's anxiety, Sakura continued to smile softly. It's smaller than Kyoto. Sarda gives off a more homey vibe to it that Kyoto lacks. The hustle of the city can be a bit much. I prefer the wilderness. Sana offered Sakura a slightly timid nod. Ever since the situation with him, she had been an anxious wreck. Her thoughts about the ebony-haired teen were a jumbled mess. She didn't know whether to be completely infatuated or absolutely terrified of the man. Her brain was at war with her. Well, she was going to keep that to herself, but short story, not good. It did not help that she felt him this morning. And by the devil, it nearly broke her. Fear and attraction fought for dominance, and she was but a lowly victim. Why did her sin have to be so difficult? It wasn't fair. Sana was ripped from her personal turmoil as Sakura spoke suddenly. Are you doing well, Satrai-san? You seem nervous. The heiress swallowed the saliva building in her mouth before sighing quietly. I'm fine. Just a few negative thoughts in my mind. Schooling her expression as best as she could, Sana offered the pinkette a small nod. There was several minutes of silence between the trio as they continued their journey towards Kyuhai. It seemed to finally dawn on Sana that the yokai representative was not wearing Kyuhai's uniform. Excuse me, Harano-san. Violet eyes glancing towards the woman in question. Are you not to be enrolled in Kyuhai in some fashion? I was under the assumption that you are of the same age as myself and Grammary-san. Sakura smiled at the question before shaking her head. While correct that we are of the same age, I chose to not enroll. Yasaka-sama offered me the choice and I opted out of doing so. I already completed school and have no desire to do so again. A slight lie to some degree, but it mattered little. Sakura would off herself before doing math equations in a classroom of individuals she couldn't stand. Sana raised an eyebrow at the answer before nodding her head. I understand. I will make sure you are treated as a guest on campus when you do visit, if you choose to do so. The pinkette offered the heiress a nod with a smile. I appreciate that, Satrai-san. The trio reached the campus grounds, entering through the giant gates of the school and ignoring the hushed whispers from the other students about who the pink-haired woman was. Sana swiftly took the lead as she led the pink-haired medic towards the student council office, passing by students and offering simple acknowledgements to each that greeted her. Upon entering the room, Sakura was greeted to the sight of multiple other devils, easily sensing the unique signatures they gave off. There was 5 of them in total, with one of those being a male. Greetings to you all. Sana nodded towards the room, receiving bows from each of her peerage members. This is Sakura Harano, the yokai representative sent from Lady Yasaka that I mentioned to you all last week. She is a guest and you will treat her as you would treat myself. Sakura smiled as Sana's peerage greeted her respectfully. It is nice to meet you all. I will be overseeing Kyuhai for the time being in conjunction with Satrai-san and Grammary-san. The members of Sana's peerage remained quiet, understanding the situation and not bothering to ask any questions. With that out of the way and all settled, please head to your classes for the time being. Our plans after school will be postponed for the time being. Sana adjusted her glasses before taking a seat at the large table in the middle of the room, gesturing towards Sakura. If you need anything, then do not hesitate to let Tsubaki or myself know. Sakura slowly approached the table, offering a polite nod to Sana's peerage as they filed out of the room. Taking her seat, Sakura glanced towards the heiress. I would not mind tea. The woman's queen immediately set off to do her task, bowing to Sakura and Sana as she did so. As Tsubaki silently began her task, Sana and Sakura continued to quietly speak to one another. I informed Grammary-san to meet here. She'll arrive in a few minutes. Tsubaki, please prepare extra tea and snacks. Thank you. Sana received a bow from her queen before turning back towards Sakura and speaking. Is there anything you'd like from me, Harano-san? Sakura was silent for a moment, fingers tapping on the table. I'd prefer if you used my first name. I'm not really huge on formalities. Makes things a little too businesslike. The heiress was quiet for a moment, internally surprised at the display. She cleared her throat for a moment before nodding her head. As you wish, Har-er. Sakura-san. No san either. Sakura was quick to say. Makes me feel old. Okay. Sakura. Sana corrected with a minor stutter, fingers ringing together beneath the table. She didn't even know why she was so anxious. Sakura didn't seem to be so bad. She was polite and kind, as far as first impressions went at least. Perhaps it was the knowledge that the girl was indirectly aligned with the man that plagued her thoughts and dreams, tormenting and pleasuring her at every corner. Before Sana's thoughts could spiral downward into further debauchery, the door to the student council office opened. Entering through the door was a red-headed teen with incredibly large breasts. Following behind her was a teen with long ebony hair that even larger breasts than the redhead. Sakura wasn't bitter. Not at all. Not even a little. She had a dump truck after all. An absolute juicer of a rear end. Breasts were the least of her worries. After all, according to a majority of scientific studies, it showed that both men and women preferred large asses over large breasts. And science never lies. Nodding to the absurd knowledge, Sakura offered the two devils a polite nod and smile, recognizing the redhead as the Gremory heiress. Gremory-san. It is a pleasure to meet you. My name is Sakura Harano and I am the yokai representative. Sakura noted that the redhead's features softened in relief. Inumaki had informed her that the red-headed heiress had reached the barrier shortly after she destroyed it. The heiress must have noticed her unconscious form and possibly tried to aid, that or for some ulterior motive. Inumaki hadn't known whether her intentions were negative or not and acted with her safety being top priority. Thank goodness you're okay. Rias states with no small amounts of relief lacing her tone. Upon realizing her little slip, a dash of red covered her cheeks along with an embarrassed smile. Oh sorry. She cleared her throat quietly, ignoring her queen's amused expression. My name is Rias Gremory and beside me is my queen, Akeno Himejawa. It is a pleasure to meet you as well, Harano-san. Sakura waves off the girl's apology with a smile. No formalities, Gremory-san. Please, just call me Sakura. Rias blinked at the pink-haired delegate before slowly taking her seat at the table. Oh. Well, okay. Rias' eyes strayed along the office, spotting Sana's queen preparing tea and other snacks. If you would Akeno, please aid Tsubaki. Of course Baku. The fallen angel devil hybrid responded. The woman offered the table a bow before sashaying her way towards Sana's queen. With both king's queens gone, there was a silence that sat in the room save for the quiet mumbling courtesy of the two queens who were fixing tea and snacks. So. Rias nervously stated, fingers tapping against the table. Not to be rude or anything that would come across as disrespectful to you, but what do you wish to talk about first? Curse her nerves. They were getting to her. The events leading up this situation were at the forefront of her mind, and now that she was finally tackling the issue, she was probably going to have a panic attack. This meeting could dictate the future of the devils and the Shinto pantheon. No pressure. Relay Ox. Sakura commented in a light-hearted manner, noticing how anxious the girls were being. I'm aware that things aren't looking. What's the word? Good? Positive. Her lips pursed in a cute manner as she tapped her chin thoughtfully. But I'm here to make sure that the agreement between the yokai faction and the devils proceeds smoothly. Sakura tapped the table with her index finger as she continued. There are certain avenues that we must adhere to, both you and I. She paused, seeing if the two teens were following her words. Noting that their attention was 100% on her, Sakura nodded. I am here to oversee and make sure that you two are properly tending to Kyoage. I want the both of you to push what Suzuki informed you to the back of your minds. You two, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, have no part or say in what the Shinto pantheon and the devils do concerning Japan or Kyoage. You two were given the responsibility of overseeing Kyoage as a sign of goodwill between the yokai faction and the devils. However, the Shinto pantheon has since then decided to remedy the issue that happened several years ago regarding the rogue devil yokai, Kurika. Is this making sense? Sana, being the more intelligent devil of the two, seemed to understand almost immediately. That makes sense. Though. It also sounds as if we haven't been doing our job correctly. She adjusted her glasses as she glanced at Rias. I was told by my sister that something happened last night involving the delegate from Kyoto. Rias' expression became strained as she stared at the table. That. That may have been my fault. Her gaze rose towards Sana and she instantly cringed at the rather heated look in the girl's eyes. What did you do, Rias? Sana questioned with a sharp gaze. You told me yesterday after class that you were going to solve the issue with the fallen angel. Rias flailed her hands in front of her as she replied. I was. I swear. But. She wrung her hands nervously in front of her before hanging her head in shame. My brother called me, distracting me from immediately going to DxD and deal with the fallen angel. Sana's eyes widened as she stared at her childhood friend. Rias. She hissed with a minor glare. Do you even realize how bad that sounds? We're supposed to deal with supernatural issues here. You promised me that you'd deal with the fallen angel issue. I didn't deal with it because I trusted you to handle it. And now you're telling me that you got distracted, allowing a rogue fallen angel to attack a delegate. Did you at least manage to save DxD? There was an awful silence that reigned after her question. Sana's eyes grew even wider as she stared at her friend. Rias. She exclaimed angrily. Do you have any idea what the repercussions of this could cause? Why didn't Dash? Rias slammed the table in frustration, upset that she was being called out by her friend. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to sit here and let you hound me for something that was out of my control. I was going to deal with the issue and I had every intention to save DxD. Sana's glare seemed to only harden as she replied. Out of your control. An innocent person was killed last night. And his blood is on your hands because of your incompetence. We wouldn't even be in this situation had you dealt with the fallen angels in the first place. Before Rias could respond to Sana, an incredibly monstrous pressure settled upon the heiress's shoulders, instantly silencing them. Their gaze swiveled to the source, noticing the rather blank expression upon Sakura's face. You two can argue with one another later. Sakura replied calmly, easing the pressure in the room. Now, calm yourselves. It does not matter who was responsible for an innocent's death. The fact of the matter is someone innocent, with no knowledge of the supernatural, was harmed and killed by a rogue supernatural being due to the negligence from both of you. Sakura pinned the two teens with a harsh stare. I do not care if Gremory-san was distracted. You, Satrai-san, should have dealt with the issue regardless of what Gremory-san told you. You both are responsible for the well-being of every individual in Kyoto. This was the agreement made upon by the devils and the yokai faction. You are both at fault here. Act like leaders, not children. The two heiresses winced at the woman's rather harsh tone. Sakura wasn't necessarily wrong with her statement. They were both responsible for the supernatural side of Kyoto and hadn't immediately dealt with the threat, regardless of how minor or small it seemed. An innocent human had perished as well as a foreign delegate being injured in the process. Sakura sighed quietly to herself as she rubbed her forehead, idly noticing that the heiress queens had brought tea and snacks to the table. The queens remained silent though and sat behind their respective kings with no small amount of nervousness. The medic picked up one of the cups and brought it to her lips. The jasmine tea did wonders to ease the tension in her body. Taking several more sips, she glanced towards both queens before speaking. The tea is wonderful, thank you. The two queens offered small smiles before offering a short bow to the pinkette. Sakura returned their smiles with one of her own before placing the cup down and speaking. Normally this situation wouldn't be considered major. The entire situation was handled rather well, barring the death of an innocent of course. His death, while tragic, was handled correctly with nary a trace of the supernatural being involved. You did well to clean up the scene, Gremory-san. The girl perked up, if only slightly, and offered a grateful nod. This will all still be reported and relayed to Lady Yasaka and it will be up to her as to what the decision will be regarding your punishment for the negligence of your duties. Do you both understand? Hi. Understood. Sakura nodded her head before taking another sip of the delicious tea. Reaching for one of the pastries on the tray, she continued. Ease up, girls. I know how hard it is when being a leader. You two are young and clearly inexperienced, but don't let this dishearten you. Learn and grow from the mistakes you make. Remember that every failure is more room for growth. I've been in your exact shoes and have experienced the same shame and frustration you are currently feeling. Sakura bit into the fluffy pastry and had to hold back the moan that tried to escape her lips. This pastry was so good. Clearing her throat to mask her near ecstasy-filled moan, she continued. Besides, I do think your punishment will be rather lax. Everything was handled relatively well despite the unfortunate circumstance regarding the innocent human. If it had been a yokai, then I wouldn't feel confident in these words. However, there are much more things we need to discuss, so I suggest the both of you get comfortable. Rias and Sana glanced at one another before sighing quietly. The redhead immediately grabbed a pastry, nearly shoving the entire thing in her mouth. Sana on the other hand grasped one of the cups of tea and downed the entire thing in 2 gulps. She took her glasses off as she massaged her eyes, sighing quietly as she did so. Yasaka intertwined her fingers together, elbows resting atop the mahogany table of her office as she listened to Sasuke and Naruto report about the kami that had visited the former. That would explain why the entirety of Kyoto felt your power, Sasuke-kun. Yasaka commented with amusement littering her tone. The aforementioned teen just rolled his eyes, attention focusing on the various council members who seemed terrified of Naruto's presence. He rose an eyebrow at their behavior but didn't bother saying anything. Naruto was the least of their worries with himself being in the room. However, this does pose an issue. Amanosaku's words are troubling. The gorgeous yokai bit her thumb in thought before glancing towards Naruto. Are you capable of finding her? The Jinhuriki sighed quietly as he slouched in his chair. Wherever the kami reside, I cannot sense. Even with my sage mode powers. I assume that Takamagahara exists in an entirely different plane. Otherwise, it shouldn't be an issue to find her. Yasaka nodded her head before tapping the table and speaking. You are all dismissed apart from Sasuke and Naruto. We will pick this up at a later date. As the yokai filed out of the room, Yasaka pulled out a unique rune from the valley of her breasts. Naruto slowly blinked at the woman's action, having a flashback to Tsunade doing something similar with a mission scroll. Yasaka ignored Naruto's stare as she channeled chakra into the object. This rune is how I communicate with Amaterasu. A simple application of chakra will alert her and she will respond in kind. The dull-looking rune began to shine brightly, nearly mimicking the sun with how blinding the light was. A second passed by before a golden pillar of light erupted in the office room. Yasaka-chan. The familiar and bubbly voice of Amaterasu sounded out in the room. What can I do FO-? The goddess released a surprised gasp as she spotted the 2 shinobi in the room. Her eyes lit up like the sun as she appeared in Naruto's personal space. It's you. The guy that absolutely demolished me. Heath. How have you been? I hope you've been doing well. Have you gotten even stronger since the last we fought? Have you? Naruto was taken aback by the woman's bubbly personality. When he had first met her, she had been a completely different person. Though to be fair, she did believe him to be an enemy of Japan, so perhaps that was the reason. He commented awkwardly as his eyes struggled to remain locked onto her face. Due to his seated position and how close the goddess was to him, her breasts were all but shoved directly into his face. I've been, well. He questioned more so than stated. And I guess I've gotten stronger. Amaterasu, completely oblivious to the close proximity and the effect she had on the teen, clapped her hands happily while bouncing in place. And it did amazing things to her chest. Ahem. Yasaka not too subtly coughed. Amaterasu-sama, please behave yourself. Sasuke watched the entire interaction with a raised brow. If he didn't know any better, then he'd say that Yasaka was feeling some form of jealousy. Yep. There it is. He watched with a tiny smirk as Yasaka's bottom lip twitched in annoyance. Amaterasu proceeded to wrap her arms around Naruto's face, smothering his face against her chest while apologizing. His smirk was wiped off his face as the woman then appeared directly in his personal space. And you? She clapped happily upon noticing the teen that had beaten her brother with his own element. You're the one that destroyed Susu-kun with lightning. That's so badass. He's been so annoyed since you beat him. Always grumbling and pouting about it. Susu-kun says he wants a rematch. I hope you beat his ass again. The Rinnegan wielder slowly blinked before furrowing his eyebrows. Thanks. He questioned unsurely. Faster than he thought possible, the woman wrapped her arms around his taller frame, squeezing him while dancing side to side like a child. The unexpected hug lasted for several seconds before Amaterasu pulled away with a happy giggle. This was the strongest god in the Shinto pantheon. Kami help us all. Suzuki thought quietly to himself. Amaterasu bounded through the room, returning to her position beside Yasaka. Suu, Yasaka-chan. What did ya need? Yasaka, already used to the goddess's unique personality, sighed quietly before speaking. There was an issue today with one of the kami involving Sasuke and Naruto. She gestured towards both teens as she spoke. Amaterasu's head tilted as she glanced towards both teens. What kami and what happened? There was a slight change to her demeanor that was instantly picked up by both Naruto and Sasuke. Aminosaku. Sasuke stated with his arms crossed. She spoke to me as if I was some tool for her to use. I threatened to kill her. He stated bluntly with little care. Afterwards, she proceeded to just spout nonsense about myself and Naruto, shedding our humanity, and becoming her equal. Both Shinobi and Kyuubi yokai noticed how sharp Amaterasu's eyes became after hearing Sasuke's statement. You are positive she said those exact words? She questioned harshly, doing a complete 180 in terms of personality. Naruto nodded as he spoke. Those words verbatim. The goddess was silent for several moments before raising her right hand. Gold particles of light were summoned directly into her hand, revealing her divine katana. The beautiful woman slowly settled into a simple Lado stance, knees bent with both hands upon her blade. Several seconds passed by in silence before Amaterasu abruptly unsheathed her blade while slicing through the air. To Naruto and Sasuke's shock, a golden portal appeared directly where she had sliced. The gaping hole was large enough for several humans to walk through, and the light it was emitting was nearly blinding. Naruto's eyebrows furrowed as hundreds upon hundreds of divine presences suddenly filtered through his senses. This was Naruto-san. Sasuke-san. Amaterasu spoke while sheathing her divine blade. This portal will guide you to the realm where all the gods and kami of the Shinto pantheon reside. Takamagahara. They both spoke in unison, staring at the portal with furrowed brows. They had heard about Takamagahara. It was kind of hard not to, considering Japan was now their home. But they never thought they'd actually get to see it. Takamagahara was the realm for the kami. The goddess turned her attention to the two teens before gesturing towards the portal with a smile. Humans have never set foot in Takamagahara. But there is a first time for everything. The goddess turned her silver orbs to Yasaka before nodding her head. If you do not mind, Yasaka-chan, I will be borrowing them for a while. Yasaka offered the goddess a simple nod before turning towards Naruto and offering the boy a beautiful smile. Good luck, Naruto-kun. This is an honor of the highest order. Her golden orbs glanced towards Sasuke as a teasing smile fixated upon her face. Behave yourself, Sasuke-kun. The Uchiha grunted quietly in annoyance, turning his head to stare at the wall. It was a very Sasuke thing to do. Naruto grinned in amusement before turning towards Yasaka. I'll make sure he doesn't cause any problems. The blonde ignored the callous insult from his friend. I guess. I'll be back soon. And I'll be waiting here for you. The Kyuubi replied with a beautiful smile. Staring into the Kyuubi's eyes and feeling emboldened, Naruto slowly leaned towards the woman before placing his lips upon her cheek. The teen pulled away with a soft smile and was about to say something before being interrupted by Amaterasu's squeal of happiness. Ah, you two are so cute. I'm rooting for you both. She squealed happily again, jumping and clapping her hands together. Which again, did amazing things to her chest. Yasaka rolled her eyes at the goddess' reaction before returning her attention to Naruto. Her left hand slowly reached out toward his face, gently stroking his whisker marks and relishing the small hue of red that overtook his complexion. Good luck. Be safe. I will. Naruto replied while grabbing a hold of the woman's hand. I promise. The two blondes continued to stare at one another before a loud cough interrupted them, courtesy of Sasuke. If you two are done fucking, then we'll be on our way. Naruto's eyebrow twitched in annoyance as he muttered under his breath. Stroking Yasaka's brand one more time, he offered her one final smile before walking towards Sasuke and Amaterasu. Yasaka watched the trio offer their goodbyes before seeing them disappear into the portal, shimmering brightly before breaking down into thousands of light particles. Chapter 10, A Deal with the Devil Princess? Sasuke didn't know what he had originally been expecting when stepping foot into Takamagahara, but he had been expecting something more. Takamagahara resembled what Japan looked like nearly 12 centuries ago. Kilometers upon kilometers of rice fields, binding rivers, and archaic architecture that had all but been erased from the modern Japanese aesthetic, save for the ruins of old monuments and shrines. While it didn't necessarily surprise the Uchiha, it left him feeling some form of disappointment. This was the home of the kami. So, forgive him if he expected something a little more robust. Nah. Why the long face, Sasuke-kun? Isn't Takamagahara beautiful? Mismatched orbs met silver as the teen met the goddess's gaze. I expected more. Blunt as ever. The goddess then proceeded to pout, and if Sasuke was being honest, it nearly caused him to falter. It should be a crime for something to be so cute. Come on Sasuke, I think it's nice. It's real traditional, that's for sure. Reminds me of Tano Kuni. Naruto's cerulean orbs traveled along the, in his opinion, beautiful landscape with an appreciative gaze. There was an ethereal energy that practically saturated the very air that wafted in this plane. Dimension? Whatever it was, it possessed nothing but this specific energy. It was so very similar to chakra, but at the same time, wasn't. If Naruto had to actually put a feeling to it, he'd say it was similar to the mode he'd be in when harnessing natural chakra in his Rakuta cloak. And that observation nearly caused Naruto to blanch. Descendants of the rabbit goddess herself, transmigrations of the most powerful humans that had ever walked the elemental nations and were the precursors to end a war that would end all wars. It was something Naruto didn't want to even entertain, and if he didn't want to tackle the subject, then he could almost guarantee that Sasuke would flip out. Oi, Sasuke. What? You're not gonna like this, but the chakra here feels eerily similar to the chakra I use in my Rakuto cloak. Sasuke. Quit speaking. The Uchiha hissed out, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. In. Out. In. Out. In. Uyut. Think of your happy place, Sasuke. Just think of your happy place. Those breathing techniques ain't working, Sasuke, and you know it. Naruto responded bluntly, crossing his arms against his chest. Shut the fuck up. Keep talking and the heavenly flames of Amaterasu will rend your flesh from your body. Wow. That is actually the most edgiest thing I've ever heard from you. Naruto joked good-naturedly, trying to defuse the situation. Your growth and character development has been amazing to watch. Sasuke's frustrated visage bled away to confusion. My what? Nothing. Naruto was quick to answer, dismissing his friend's question. Nana. What were you two talking about a second ago? Amaterasu asks curiously. The two shinobi glance at one another, silent for a couple of moments before Naruto eventually responds. The chakra that I can sense here is similar to the chakra that myself and Sasuke can use. He explains slowly. The goddess tilted her head cutely, eyebrows furrowing. What's so unique about that? From our world, the only individuals that were capable of harnessing this chakra was the progenitor of it and her children. His facial expression began to slowly shift, lips pulling down into a frown. The man who gave us this power was known as the Rakuta Sennin, or the Sage of Six Paths. With just half of his power, we were able to defeat a goddess with the power to annihilate our home world. Which can really only lead to one conclusion. Or at least, the only conclusion myself and Sasuke can realistically come up. Sasuke takes over, finishing what Naruto was going to say. There are more beings like Kaguya, capable of traveling through universes and or dimensional planes with ease. And while I'd prefer it to just be a coincidence that the kami are capable of using Rakuta chakra, I cannot ignore the possibility that more of those beings exist, spreading their influence on multiple worlds and planets. Amaterasu's eyebrows had begun to slowly rise throughout Naruto and Sasuke's words, slightly surprised at how serious they were being. The two teens had a rather unique dynamic that reminded her of the relationship she had with Susu-kun. To see them so on edge about this was interesting. Was this Kaguya mortal, like you two are? She asked curiously. No. Naruto shakes his head negatively. Sasuke and I know little about Kaguya save for the information that Super Gramps left us. But there was zero possibility of her having been a human. You can kill a person, but our only option was to seal her away. Amaterasu makes a quiet noise of acknowledgement before speaking once more. What did she look like? The two shinobi glance at one another for a moment, having a silent conversation. Naruto eventually just shrugs his shoulder before being engulfed in a small cloud of smoke. When it clears, a pale-skinned woman is now standing in his place. Amaterasu's head tilts nearly 90 degrees as she studies the woman that Naruto transformed into. Her skin was as white as snow, and atop her head sat a pair of horns that resembled rabbit ears. She possessed 3 eyes upon her face, with her main ones being pure white with no pupils. In the center of her forehead sat another unique-looking eye that resembled the one in Sasuke's left socket, save for the fact that it was red instead of violet and had double the amount of the tomos. I cannot recall ever seeing an individual with these physical attributes. The goddess slowly admits, eyes still studying the woman. In a voice that baffled Amaterasu, Naruto spoke elegantly and softly, mimicking Kaguya's own. Kaguya Otsutsuki was the strongest being to walk on our world. She was able to not only create any dimension she wished to, but was also able to control any aspect of the environment in which she crafted. Chakra-induced jutsu had no effect on her and only strengthened her. Kaguya was only sealed away because she was desperate and made mistakes during our battle. She lacked true combat experience, and it showed, for if she possessed the experience we had, Sasuke and myself would not be here today. The goddess stared at the pale woman Naruto was masquerading as before, frowning lightly. And you two believe that there may be more of these beings? Possibly stronger than her? Kaguya, or Naruto, nodded their head. And because of Kaguya's ability to create dimensions, you also suspect that these beings could potentially teleport to different dimensions and universes altogether. Sasuke nodded his head while speaking. We can't ignore the possibility. Hagoromo Otsutsuki informed us that his mother came from the stars. There is no true way of knowing if they exist in this universe, but it is something to be wary of. A poof of smoke surrounded Naruto, his transformation disappearing. Imagine if Kaguya was considered weak amongst her people. I can't fathom fighting multiple individuals on her or above her level. He shook his head as he did so, frustration bleeding into his voice. For something to unnerve the both of you. The goddess spoke seriously. It'll be okay. She exclaimed, tone shifting into childlike nonchalance. Sasuke just stared at the woman as if she had lost her mind. Did you not just hear what we said? Oh, I heard it. She replied, nodding her head with a smile. But I don't think you two should worry about it. And why wouldn't we? The Uchiha questioned with a heavy amount of annoyance, fingers clenching in frustration. Because you two have help now. She spoke with a simple smile, much like a child. Oh, and that help is you? Sasuke questioned snidely, crossing his arms against his chest. Well, duh. She replied loudly, mimicking Sasuke and crossing her arms below her breasts, pushing them up. I'm not weak. And neither is Susu-kun or Tsuki-kun. These dumb aliens won't know what hit em. Sasuke, once again, just stared at the goddess as if she had lost her mind. His unique eyes slowly strayed away before focusing on Naruto. We're so fucked. Naruto's obnoxious laughter only further grated on Sasuke's already thin patience. What? Amaterasu questioned curiously. You think I'm weak? Her bottom lip threatened to push out, a cute pout painting her face. Sasuke glanced back towards the woman, speaking as he did. Naruto took you out with one ability. He explained in a dull tone. What real help will you be? There was an odd silence that reigned between the trio after Sasuke's question. It was slowly becoming an uneasy one. Where there had once been the idle noise that one would expect when standing amongst nature, there was now nothing. An eerie silence that pervaded the world, causing the hairs on the back of Naruto and Sasuke's neck to stand on edge. The familiar feeling of danger resonated through their sixth sense, causing their blood to boil. The telltale sign of adrenaline surged through their veins, eyes growing, and chakra exploding. If you think that I took that fight serious for even a second, then you are a foolish man. Amaterasu spoke blandly, silver eyes dull and lifeless. I am the ruler of Takamagahara and Japan's sole protector for a reason. Had I used the full force of my power, then Japan would cease to exist. She stated firmly, silencing Sasuke and Naruto. We gods are bound by rules and adhere to these so as to not usurp the delicate balance that exists on earth. Should we gods just walk amongst the land with our full powers bearing down upon humanity, the world would end as we know it. And though you two are incredibly powerful and gifted, you are only human. You will peak and stagnate, and eventually, you will die. Do not think that we are equals for even a second. She continued as her form began to glow a heavenly golden color, becoming nearly as bright as the sun itself. Naruto merely defeated the mortal form I possess. The gods of this world operate on a different plane, and should you wish to test it, I will allow you to do so. Naruto and Sasuke shielded their eyes as the blinding light emanating from Amaterasu glowed even brighter. An enormous amount of pressure descended upon their shoulders, and they were forced to tense their shoulders due to it. Opening their eyes, they gazed upon a woman who shared the same physical traits as Amaterasu, but yet there was something off about her. The amount of power that was currently rolling off the goddess was something to behold. Sasuke could see the differences, whereas Naruto could feel them. It was similar to the feeling they had during their fight with Madara when he possessed the Juubi and had obtained the Limbo ability. Amaterasu's power had just increased nearly tenfold. And what did she mean when she spoke about her mortal form? Whoa! You just got way stronger. Naruto admits with raised eyebrows. Where was this power during our fight in Kyoto? Amaterasu's features remained mainly the same, that being her facial structure and silver eyes, but her essence just seemed to reek of natural chakra and some unknown energy. The pores of her skin seemed to radiate and pulse with ethereal golden energy, blazing like the sun. The goddess turned her gaze upon Naruto, silver eyes taking on a softer tone. It is like I said, Naruto. I appeared before you in my mortal form. I am stronger in my divine form. The same goes for any god through any religion. A small frown found its way on Sasuke's face as he stares at the woman. Any god. Any. Amaterasu confirmed with a nod. That certainly changed things now, didn't it? This meant the gods of other factions and other religions were even more powerful than originally assumed. So, Naruto tilted his head, sensing other gods slowly edging their way towards their position. If we fought again and I beat you in that form, then it's safe to say I'm stronger. A bemused smile formed on Amaterasu's face as she tilted her head, sword, and shield materializing at her side. I shall let you know that my strength is at its most powerful right here in the heart of Takamagahara. Do you still wish to test your mettle, mortal? There was a condescending tone to her voice near the end of her statement, alluding to the fact that she was poking fun at his mortality. It didn't take a genius to know that regardless, and while Naruto wasn't the type of individual to allow petty insults to get to him, something about how she said it bothered him. She's packing some ridiculous power in her now. Why do you always want to cause problems? Kurama questioned in an annoyed tone. Do not take this fight. She holds the entire deck of cards in her hands. We're also on her home turf. I'm sure she's got even more of a boost in power due to that, considering how this god shit works. Yeah, but I wanna fight her. Naruto replied mentally, a small smile beginning to make its way upon his face. A smile Sasuke didn't like seeing. Don't even think about it. He warned with a scowl. Already thinking about it? Naruto replied with a grin while grabbing the hem of his hoodie and pulling it over his head. Why not? I haven't been able to cut loose in a long time. He turned towards his best friend, staring at his annoyed expression. Come on Sasuke. Don't you want to do the same? We always hold back against each other. Let me fight her. Sasuke just stared at the teen, watching as his friend began to flex his chakra pool. The air began to ripple and distort as Naruto continued to flex the absurd amount of chakra that was crammed in his body. The Uchiha released a heavy sigh, eyes roaming along the rice fields and spotting several unique-looking gods and creatures. He even spotted a few gods that he recognized due to studying about the Shinto pantheon. Sasuke sighed quietly before glancing back towards his friend and shaking his head. If you get your ass kicked, don't come crying to me. He raised a lazy salute before disappearing in a burst of speed, appearing on one of the various mountain ranges that overlooked the area Naruto and Amaterasu were standing in. Why? Just why? All Sasuke asked for when he woke up today was for a single day of normality. Just one single day. But no. The fates told him to go fuck himself. Having to deal with an annoying ass kami who spoke about some ritual, and now he was going to watch his friend either get destroyed or come out victorious against the strongest kami that belonged to the Shinto pantheon. Your friend is an idiot. A gruff masculine voice resounded out from beside Sasuke. The Rinnegan wielder glanced to the man that stood beside him, recognizing him. A powerful idiot, but an idiot nonetheless. Susanoo bowed his head, straw hate hiding his face. To challenge sister in the heart of Takamagahara while in her divine form. A gruff chuckle escaped the man as he continued. He's either suicidal or extremely confident. For a human, it is impressive. Sasuke side-eyed the god that stood beside him, noting the amount of derision that the man used on the word human. Did all gods look down upon humans? Did they all see themselves as superior just because they were a god? You look down on humans. Sasuke stated, rather asked, watching as Naruto began to go through several stretching exercises. Astute observation. Susanoo mockingly replied, not bothering to glance towards Sasuke. That rankled Sasuke's pride something fierce. As astute as that loss you received? Or did I fry your memory with my lightning? He spoke in a condescending tone. I remember defeating you with relative ease. Mortal form or not, you still lost. He scoffed in disdain, turning his nose away from the prideful kami. You gods need to relearn what hubris means. Or does prancing around like the false protectors of an entire society and country make you feel better? Insecurities you can't seem to overcome? Please, interrupt me if I've spoken out of turn, oh great and almighty kami. Don't speak to me like you're my better. If you want a fight, then I'll give you one. Sasuke's Rinnegan flared to life, glowing a dark purple as his Mangekyo Sharingan spun hypothetically. His blood surged beneath his veins as a miasma of purple chakra began to bubble up from beneath his skin, nearly forming the Susanoo upon his body. A cruel smirk formed on Susanoo's face as he began to flex his own power, kimono flapping wildly. His silver eyes began to glow bright as lightning began to crackle off his body and his sheathed sword. You are powerful for a human, but can you back up those words? Susanoo unsheathed his sword as an explosion of lightning struck down upon his position, forcing Sasuke to evade the explosion. A smoke screen covered the area before a shockwave of power blew it away, revealing Susanoo's divine form. Sparks of lightning crackled off of Susanoo's body and the distinct smell of ozone wafted in the area. The kami placed one hand upon his sheathed blade, taking up a simple Iaido stance. Sasuke scoffed at the display before unsheathing his own kusanagi and tensing his body. His knees bent and his chakra rolled off his body in waves, crashing down into the mountain, cracking it and sending chunks careening off the edge. Show me, human. Show me your warrior spirit. Susanoo cried as he disappeared, the sound of thunder following his movement. Sasuke's eyes dilated as the kami appeared directly in his face, divine blade and course to blaze a bloody path through his stomach. His own kusanagi met the man's blade as a shock wave of energy detonated out from their clash, causing a torrent of electricity to explode outwards from their position. Sasuke's expression shifted viciously as he met Susanoo's unique, grey eyes. His Rinnegan flared as a force of energy slammed directly into the kami, causing his eyes to momentarily widen as his feet began to dig trenches through the hardened earth. Shinra Tensei. The kami managed to dig his heels into the ground, momentarily fighting against the behemoth force of nature that was trying to whisk him away. It was all for naught though, as Sasuke flexed the entirety of his chakra pools upon Susanoo's shoulders. With a flick of the wrist and the aid of his Rinnegan ability, Susanoo practically cannoned through the gigantic mountain, meeting the floor of it near instantaneously. Not even allowing the kami to right himself from his abrupt departure, Sasuke performed a single hand sign, spewing an enormous fireball that rivaled the size of the mountain he stood upon, covered in the flames of Amaterasu. Onten, Gukakyu no Jutsu. The spiraling ball of flames descended upon Susanoo's position a moment later, absolutely decimating the mountain and causing several massive quakes to the environment. Sasuke descended shortly afterwards, not wanting the god to even catch his breath. If Susanoo was a warrior, then he would adapt. And if he couldn't adapt, then that was his own incompetence in battle. But he had an advantage here where he hadn't had during his fight with Kaguya. Elemental ninjutsu could cause actual damage and elemental jutsu was his forte. Naruto had a carefree smile upon his face as he stretched his joints, humming quietly to himself. It's been way too long since I've able to let loose. Amaterasu's bemused expression maintained itself as she stared at the mortal who had claimed Kyoto as his home. She didn't show it outwardly, but the boy had left an impression on her when they first met. Of course, the circumstances in which they had first met was anything but positive. It didn't deter her from learning all she could about the odd little quartet. Prying information out of Yasaka had been relatively easy considering the group hid nothing. They came from an entirely different universe with the aid from eyes of all creatures. One of the most powerful beings in the entire universe. These four clearly attracted the worst of luck, but according to Yasaka, they were on good terms with the dragon god. Even on a first-name basis. Which was... well, words didn't really capture how ludicrous and amazing that was. Amaterasu loved to play the ditzy sibling and she believed she played it very well. Of course, it wasn't that hard to play considering she kind of was a ditz at times. Her brothers believed she was too soft on the mortals she protected. She, however, would disagree. She did not look down on humans like those of her kin. Humans were a fascinating creation, and the few times that humans rose to the heights of a god was a sight to see. Many a human had done what the gods thought to be impossible, slaying a god. And though the biblical God had created the means for humans to achieve this feat, it still did not discredit their achievements. However, a mortal with no sacred gear did not possess the power to slay a god. Only a god could kill a god after all, regardless of how powerful the human was. It was just a fact. Only the power of another god could eradicate the divine power that coursed through her veins. Gods slaying their own kin was seen as taboo. Slaying a god had consequences. And the humans that had done so had learned of them. You cannot just kill that which controls aspects of life with no repercussions. And while Amaterasu highly doubted that Naruto wanted to kill her, it was best to err on the side of caution. He did possess some ridiculous power in him after all. And if he had the capability to eradicate her mortal form with relative ease, then she was excited to see how far he could truly go. Just what did he have stored up for her? Amaterasu's smile slowly grew as she watched the boy speak aloud to himself, seemingly talking to someone else that weren't there. He was an odd boy, that was for sure. Just what does Yasaka-chan see you in, little one? She mentally questioned, curiosity growing as time passed by. Yosh! Naruto exclaimed excitedly as he punched his open palm. I'm ready to go, Ama-chan. Ama-chan? How cute. He was so adorable. Amaterasu allowed her smile to soften as her divine katana slowly rotated in the air, hovering next to her palm. I look forward to our battle then. I hope your power isn't just for show then. Oh, I can promise you that I'm about that life. He affirmed with a smirk, chakra rippling and distorting around his body. Don't cry when you lose, Ama-chan. He added cheekily, placing both of his palms together in a prayer-like motion. Despite herself, Amaterasu found herself matching the teen's smile and tone. I will make sure to remind you of these words, Naruto-kun. As Naruto was about to power up using Kurama's cloak, he sensed Sasuke's power spike followed by the spike of another kami. It caused him to pause, head swiveling towards the vast mountain range that loomed over them. A second passed by before a powerful shockwave detonated through Takamagahara. A nanosecond passed by before the mountain practically exploded, causing several quakes to spread throughout the rice fields. Naruto sensed a buildup of chakra before seeing an enormous fireball that rivaled the size of a Baijuya, coated in the flames of Amaterasu speeding down towards the ground. The subsequent explosion that followed was nothing short of spectacular. Ash and cinder painted the sky, blanketing it in a smog of smoke as Naruto watched the exchange. Why was Sasuke fighting? What had happened? Should we stop them? Naruto questioned, watching with heightened vision as Sasuke and Susanoo traded blades. Several sonic booms rocked Takamagahara with each swipe of the sword, lightning striking various random locations. Amaterasu scoffed quietly, a small pout bleeding its way upon her gorgeous face. That's not fair. I was supposed to be showing off. Me. Not Susu-kun. He always ruins my fun. Naruto glanced back towards the woman, noting her adorable pout and physically struggled with the urge to comfort her. He laughed awkwardly as he spoke. It's going to be okay. We can still fight, Ama-chan. The goddess vehemently shook her head, hands balling up into fists and coming to rest in front of her breasts. No. I don't want to anymore. Susu-kun ruins everything. Naruto blanched as fresh tears began to pool in the woman's silvery eyes. He raised his hands, shaking them aid to side as he tried to ignore the vicious tremors emanating from Sasuke's fight. Don't cry. Why are you crying? Ah. How do I fix it? Naruto succumbed to the goddess's tears, panicking as she threw a childish tantrum. It was a peculiar sight for all the kami to witness, watching as a clueless, mortal teenager tried to console the most powerful goddess in the Shinto pantheon. And while peculiar, it was not completely unexpected. Amaterasu was known to act like a child even on the best of days. What an odd day in Takamagahara. Sakura released a heavy sigh as she bid her goodbyes to the devil heiresses. Several hours of detailed documents, conversations about how things should be run, and any other political jargon that existed when involving two separate factions on the cusp of violence. She held no ill will towards the young women and truly wished to see them flourish and blossom in their roles. They were, after all, in ceded positions of powers for their respective clans. The girls were also decent enough if not a bit naive about their life. But that could be Sakura's own perception on life that allowed her to view them as such. They lacked the experiences she now had, and to her knowledge, they had been relatively sheltered. They hadn't been put in dozens of life or death situations like she had at the tender age of 12. And that wasn't their fault. That was just life. Some individuals get dealt good hands and others bad. As she walked through the school grounds, emerald eyes occasionally trailing over various windowed cabinets, filled with various trophies, medals, and other things revolving around academics and or sports, she was reminded of the childhood she didn't really have. It was an odd feeling, seeing things like this. Kyoa Academy was very prestigious, or so it appeared. Wouldn't have anything to do with the supernatural, now would it? Surely not. As Sakura exited the academy doors, pushing them open and gazing at the setting sun, she's drawn from her thoughts by the sound of rushed footsteps behind her. Sakura-san. The pinkette furrowed her eyebrows before turning around, watching as the Gremory heiress jogged her way through the halls, right hand waving in the air. Sakura-san. The redhead called out, coming to a stop with a minor huff. Thought I wasn't going to reach you in time. Phew. Sakura rose a curious eyebrow at the girl before turning around and giving Rias her full attention. What did I say about formalities? The Gremory seemed to blanch before coughing into her hand and straightening her back. Sorry. It's a force of habit. Japanese culture and customs and whatnot. Sakura didn't really blame her. Japanese etiquette was far more formal and professional than Konoha had been. Did you need something, Rias? The medic asked curiously, leaning against the open door of the academy. Rias perked up cutely, as if suddenly remembering what she had called Sakura for. I just wanted to properly thank you. She expressed gratefully with a demure smile. And to apologize. To you specifically. Her expression lowered, demure smile being replaced with shame-filled one. If I hadn't gotten distracted, you wouldn't have been injured and this entire situation would have been prevented. Rias proceeded to place both of her hands at her sides before bowing to Sakura, long red hair cascading down her face. Please, forgive me for the trouble I have caused. Sakura herself then blanched, placing her hands upon Rias' shoulders and forcing her back to a standing position. Hey. There's no need to bow. I accept your apology, now please. Refrain from doing that. You don't need to apologize in the first place. Rias allowed Sakura to move her, not really fighting the woman's action. Her expression remained downtrodden as she spoke with her hands crossed in front of her waist. I disagree, Sakura. She shook her head, red tresses flinging to and fro. Sana wouldn't been in this position if I had just done my job. I guess. Never mind. She shook her head slowly. It would just be another excuse for my incompetence. I didn't realize just how important my role would be. Sakura sighed quietly before placing her index finger on Ria's chin, slowly pushing upwards. Chin up, Rias. There's no need to dwell on it. What's done is done. The important part is that you learned. Mistakes and failures are a part of our lives. Everyone has to lose at some point and no winner can continue winning. Ria's blue eyes glanced down at the finger upon her chin before rising to meet the pink emerald orbs. You make it sound so easy. Sakura relinquished her hold upon the woman, chuckling quietly at the woman's response. Well, I speak from experience. I've failed plenty of times in my youth. Even seeing myself as a burden to those I love and care for. But at the end of the day, who doesn't feel that way at some point in their life? Ria's lips part at the woman's words. Does it ever get easier to deal with? Failing, that is. Do you ever expect to fail? Once you fail enough times, that sting slowly begins to disappear. That's not to say the feeling fully disappears or anything, but it just affects you less so. Now, do I ever expect to fail? All the time. Sakura answered with a simple nod. Failure is always there and it's natural to fear it. But you can't allow it to control you and dictate what you do in life. Take risks. You're young and have a full life ahead of you. Make mistakes and then learn from those mistakes. No one is perfect. Not even gods. The Gremory heiress stared at the pinkette with a hint of admiration in her blue eyes. But do you ever get scared of the potential repercussions that could follow should you fail? Sakura crossed her arms against her chest, shifting her weight on her right leg and unknowingly accentuating her curves. Nah, not really. She chuckled good-naturedly, smiling in amusement at Ria's baffled expression. I usually solve all my problems with my fists. And I fancy myself as a winner when it comes to hand-to-hand combat. I'm no slouch and can pull my own. She takes a boxer's stance, punching at the air with a force that surprised Rias. That's... Well, I expected you to be really strong considering you know him. She grimaced at the memory of Sasuke before shaking her head, ridding herself of that terrifying experience. Well, thank you Sakura. For all the advice and help you've given me today. You didn't have to even acknowledge me but you chose to do so. I appreciate it. Really, I do. Sakura offered the redhead a small smile as she waved off the woman's gratitude. Don't mention it, Rias. If you ever need to talk about anything, then feel free to reach to me. She pulled out her phone, handing it to the woman to put in her contact information. Just because we belong to different factions doesn't mean we have to be at odds every step of the way. My best friend believed that our home was capable of uniting together. I have started to appreciate his philosophy and way of thinking a lot more nowadays. Ria's eyebrows furrowed at the past tense usage of her words. Believed? She questioned with a minor amount of concern. Did something happen? Sakura tried to hide the pain-filled expression but wasn't successful in her endeavor. She was silent for a few moments before sighing quietly. I'd rather not speak about it. Rias nodded her head in understanding, offering her condolences. I'm sorry if it seemed like I was prying. It's none of my business. Sakura, once again, waved off the woman's reply. It's fine, Rias. You didn't know. I'm mostly over it. I have a new home now and I'm finally happy. Sakura's words caused a small smile to form on the redhead's face. Finally happy? She questioned curiously, crossing her arms beneath her breasts. The medic released a quiet sigh, shaking her head. Ugh. It's a long story. Rias stared at the women for a few moments before shrugging her shoulders with a smile. Well, I got time. Sakura stared at the heiress for a moment or two before smirking. Perhaps I could be persuaded to tell you, if you treat me to dinner. I am starving after all. Rias grasped her chin with her left hand, blue eyes narrowing in thought. I think I can work with that. The medic smiled as she stepped out of the doorway of the academy, motioning for Rias to lead her. Well then, lead the way, princess. The heiress made a noise of annoyance at the title. Ugh. Please don't call me that. I'm not a princess. Sakura snorted as she followed behind the heiress. Could have fooled me. Stop it. Rias whined with an adorable pout. I'll think about it. Kakashi huffed quietly to himself as he summoned Divine Dividing once again. He was standing shirtless in an open field, sweat dripping down his body as he flexed his impressive chakra pool. He had been training for several hours, calling upon Divine Dividing and maintaining the form for as long as he could. Having never been a stamina juggernaut during his time as a shinobi, working purely on stamina was a challenge in itself. He was not Guy and he certainly wasn't Naruto. He was a tactical fighter, meant for short and quick battles. His speciality lied in his wit and immense talent in the shinobi arts. And while he had fought for several days during the war, he had also been given chakra several times throughout the war. Fighting multiple powerful shinobi and then going on to fight multiple Jinhiriki, Obito, Juobi monster-like creations, Madara, and then Kaguya. So it's not like he didn't possess stamina, but unlike Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura, who all had gifted levels of stamina, he was pretty average. Or as average as one could be when fighting in a 3-day-long war with no food or rest. Kakashi held himself to a high standard. He was a perfectionist and anything less than perfect was a failure. It didn't matter if he could stay on his feet for 3 days straight, fighting for his life against multiple world-ending threats. He wouldn't have been able to do it for 4 days, and that's what really mattered here. Your drive is admirable, but even you need some rest, partner. Kakashi huffed, sweat dripping down his features. Not good enough, Albion. I need to master this power. He stood to his full height, turning his gaze upon the multiple yokai lined up to aid him. Again. The dozen or so yokai nodded their head before performing several Yujitsu attacks and allowing the techniques to merge together. The amalgamated Yujitsu technique rocketed towards Kakashi's position a second later. Divide. The masked Jonin cried, dividing the attack, expelling the excess energy and causing several shockwaves to detonate from his position. You're a true natural, partner. Albion comments respectfully. However, if you continue on this path, then you will only hurt yourself. You need to rest, partner. There will be plenty of time to master my abilities. There is no need to rush. Kakashi huffed once again, hands coming to rest upon his knees. His sacred gear flickers before disappearing back into his body. Damn it! He muttered frustratedly. I need to get stronger. Why, partner? For what reason are you pushing yourself so far for? Kakashi's eyes narrow as he thinks about his 3 students that surpassed him. How they had put their lives on the line during the fight with Kaguya and how he had been forced to sit on the sidelines, watching as they struggled. He had only been able to aid once during the fight, using both of Obito's Mangekyou's Sharinans to summon a perfect Susanoo. And though he had aided in the defeat of the rabbit goddess, he couldn't help but feel inadequate when compared to his students. He didn't envy them or feel resentment or anything of the sort. But he just felt useless. Kakashi had felt like a burden to them during the war, as if he was only in the way. He knew it was illogical to compare himself to someone like Naruto and Sasuke, but even when paired with Sakura, her mastery of the 100 healings jutsu allowed her to surpass her limits, rivaling Tsunade, and even surpassing the woman's strength. I don't wish to be a burden to my students. I want to help them. He revealed quietly, dropping to his bottom with a quiet grunt. I need this, Albion. If only for my own sanity. The dragon was silent for several seconds before eventually grunting quietly. Very well. Let us continue, partner. Kakashi sighed quietly, a small smirk forming on his masked face. Thank you, Albion. Do not thank me. The dragon grunts quietly. Get stronger. For your family. The Jonin chuckles, rising to his feet and flexing his chakra, summoning Divine Dividing. Let's go. A melodious giggle escaped Rias as she dipped a French fry into ketchup. Her other hand was covering her mouth, desperately attempting to rein in her laughter. Wait. Another giggle escaping her. So you're telling me that he not only managed to incapacitate the leader of your village, but he did it while transforming into a naked woman. Sakura tried to staunch her laughter as she took a sip from her cup. She failed, obviously, but managed to prevent anything embarrassing from happening. Yes, he did. A fond smile overcame Sakura's features as she continued. Naruto is an interesting man. I've known him for most of my life. He's a brother to me. I would go to hell and back for him. But there are times where I just want to wring his neck. Rias giggled once more, taking her French fry and placing it in her mouth. He sounds like a good guy. Yeah. Sakura agreed quietly, nodding her head and lowering her gaze to her food. Yeah, he is. Rias was able to catch the slight change of mood her statement brought. A small frown formed on her face as she spoke. Hey, did I say something wrong? I'm sorry if I overstepped any boundaries or anything. The pinkette shook her head, waving off Rias' apology. You sure do apologize a lot, Rias. She smirked at the girl's adorable pout. No, it's not that, it's just. I wasn't the greatest friend to Naruto despite our long history together, and I'll be the first to admit that. I've grown a lot since being that immature child I was years ago, but sometimes, I can't help but lament on my past. It's a bad habit of mine. The Gremory was silent for a few moments, twisting a French fry between her fingers. Well, what matters is that you're a good friend right now, right? From how you speak of him, he sounds like a really good guy. Maybe he sees it differently. Sakura cracked a crooked smile. I'm sure he does. Naruto has a unique outlook on life and is a rather pure man. The compassion he has. It's something that many of us lack. We could learn a thing or two from him. Rias dipped another fry in her favorite condiment, placing the food in her mouth and idly chewing away. A comfortable silence descended between the two women as they continued to eat their Western-inspired meal. It was apparently a very popular fast food chain that had spread across America before going international after major success, now being nearly $1 trillion corporation. So, what do you think of the food? Rias asked curiously, eating another fry. Greasy. Sakura answered simply, taking a bite out of her burger. I mean, I guess it's okay. Terribly unhealthy, that's for sure. Rias snickered quietly as she popped a chicken nugget into her mouth. It isn't supposed to be healthy. It's marketed as being convenient, and what's more convenient than a full meal made in less than 5 minutes? Well, the redhead made a good point with that. True. Sakura acquiesced simply. Could be a bit healthier though. She grumbled quietly, taking another bite of the burger. The Gremory heiress snickered once again. You're really adamant about this, aren't you? A small pout made its way onto her face. I was studying to become a doctor in my old home. A small lie, but a relatively harmless one. It's habitual of me to critique things like this. I can't help it. Rias smiled as she wiped her fingers clean with a spare napkin. I think it's cute. Cute? The medic questioned with a strange expression upon her face. Yeah, cute. Rias affirmed with a nod. You're a very cute woman. Such simple words. Words Sakura had never really heard before. Having grown up her entire life with a twisted view on not only herself but of her surroundings, it was different. Especially by a woman of all things. Rias didn't really strike her as the type to play for the other team, but she also didn't really know her either. And she could have just been calling her cute to tease her. It didn't necessarily mean anything deep. But still, Sakura found it nice to be complimented, even if the manner was that of a teasing nature. So, I'm cute then, yeah? Sakura questioned with half-lidded eyes, placing her elbow on the table and leaning her head upon her hand, staring directly into Rias' eyes. Two could play at that game. The Gremory heiress stared at Sakura's expression with widened eyes. Well, you know. She awkwardly explained. You just have that aesthetic, yeah, no? Ahem. Yeah. Her eyes strayed away from the woman, not entirely used to such displays, less so from a woman. Huh. Sakura hummed with a smile. I'm an aesthetic now, am I? Please, continue. Pamper me, Rias. Speak more about me. She spoke haughtily, nose turned upwards. Rias puffed her cheeks out, embarrassment prominent through her features. Mao. Why do you have to tease me? Sakura just laughed quietly, grabbing a napkin and wiping her hands clean. Why not? Maybe I want to see your reaction? Maybe I have an ulterior motive? Who knows? Why would you want to see my reaction? Rias asked curiously, crossing her arms beneath her generous chest. You play for the other team? She asked while wiggling her eyebrows. Did she? It wasn't as if she looked at other women in her spare time. All her focus had been on Sasuke, and that was a can of worms she had yet to address with the man himself. Getting drunk and trying to speak with him those couple of days ago probably wasn't the best option. But Sakura had long since let go of her romantic feelings for Sasuke. She had been obsessed with him for unhealthy and toxic reasons, and no amount of reconciliation between the two could transpire into a romantic relationship. It was just a pipe dream, and one Sakura fancied no longer. Her happiness was her main priority, and she only wished the best for Sasuke himself. And it wasn't as if he wasn't happy. Sasuke had been less tense with Kurika now roaming the compound they stayed at, and he seemed more at ease with the woman around. If she made him happy, then that's all really mattered. She and Sasuke may never have had a true future together, but he was still family as far as she was concerned. She loved him just as she loved Naruto and Kakashi. Only less so romantically and more platonically. Well. Sakura started slowly, genuinely thinking about Ria's question. I can't say that I do, but I also wouldn't rule out the possibility. I guess I'll just have to experiment then, won't I? Rias ignored the woman's rather suggestive tone about experimenting. You don't have a preference? She asked curiously. Sakura furrowed her eyebrows, leaning back into her chair. Well, I'm pretty sure I lean towards men more, but the idea of being with a woman doesn't really bother me, per se. I mean, at the end of the day, all that really matters is if I'm happy with the person I'm with. The heiress nodded her head at the answer. She wasn't necessarily wrong. If the person made you happy, then why did gender matter? Of course, there was always an extent to these levels. Such as if a child made you happy and that was just outright disgusting and vile. You raise a good point. She mumbled quietly, eyes narrowing in thought. She was quiet for a few moments as she debated her next question. It was a stretch and could completely backfire, upending this new friendship. And while that would suck considering Sakura was her superior to some degree, she needed help. Sakura. She finally spoke, gaining the necessary courage to speak up. Is it okay if I tell you something personal about myself? The medic furrowed her eyebrows at the abrupt change. Sure, Rias. What's up? Rias took a deep breath, calming her nerves. I want to preface what I'm about to say first. That being that in no way, shape, or form am I trying to manipulate you or lead you on or anything like that. She placed her hands on the table, staring down at her conjoined fingers. What do you know about devil marriages? Sakura furrowed her eyebrows, slightly taken aback by the statement. Well, not that much to be honest. I do know that a lot of pure devils died during their civil war. So, to prevent their bloodlines from dying out, Ajoka Beelzebub created the evil pieces system that allowed individuals of any race to become a reincarnated devil. But I'm guessing that isn't really relevant to your question. Sakura, however, was surprised when Rias shook her head. It is relevant. To keep the pure blood from dying out, many heirs and heiresses were forced into marriages at a young age, bound by a contract signed by the parents. In doing so, it prevents us, the heirs and heiresses, from finding someone we wish to be with. The medic furrowed her eyebrows at the redhead's explanation. This was very similar to the marriages of clans back in the elemental nations. While it wasn't as prominent, considering many of the clans preferred to inbreed, a topic for another day, it was still a reality. Some clans wished to keep their blood pure, like the Hyuga, while others, like the Nara and Inyazuka, did not mind mingling outside their clan. I'm going to assume you're in one of these contracts then. Rias released a pitiful sigh, nodding her head. Yes. I have been fighting against this arrangement since I was a child. Searching for loopholes, negotiations, anything that would allow me to break free from it. But I've come up empty every single time. It's so frustrating. She banged the table loudly, anger forming upon her beautiful face. Why? It isn't fair. Every time I bring the issue up to my father this is for the greater good of our people. I'm sick of hearing it. I deserve better than to be wed to some arrogant jackass with zero social etiquette. How can any parent stare into the faces of their children and tell them they aren't allowed to do what they wish to in life? Her hands balled into fists as tears coalesced in her eyes. I haven't made the best decisions as a child, but I don't deserve to suffer through a loveless marriage, bound by a piece of paper and stripped of my own personal desires. I don't deserve that. Sakura's features softened as she stared at the heiress. Rias was right. She didn't deserve what was happening to her. No one did, really. But there was nothing that she could realistically do for her. Sakura placed a gentle hand atop Rias' own, stroking the back of it with her thumb. Are you positive that there is no alternative? Have you exhausted every available option? The redhead used her other hand to scrub at her eyes, ridding herself of her tears. There are only two options I can really do. The first one is to just kill myself. She shrugged with a self-deprecating laugh. I've entertained the idea of doing so. A grimace set itself upon Sakura's face. For her to be so desperate that she'd resort to suicide just to prevent this marriage from occurring. Rias shook her head sadly, blue eyes falling to the hand atop her own. I can't do that though. My peerage means the world to me. I can't abandon them. I love them like family. She released a heavy sigh, placing her other hand atop Sakura's own. My only other option is a raiding game. And while I'm confident in my peerage, I know a losing battle when I see one. My fiancé has a full peerage on top of being one of best fighters of our age group. He has dozens of raiding game matches under his belt and my peerage lacks experience. It'd be suicide. But it's currently my only option now. I can't run from this anymore. Sakura continued to stroke the woman's hand, providing what little comfort she could. Why tell me this? Not that it really bothered her, but she could sense that there was something Rias obviously desired from her. The Gremory heiress was silent for several moments, staring at their conjoined hands. Can you help me? She raised her eyes towards Sakura, desperation and hope evident. Please. I'll do anything. Anything. Just please, help me. Sakura grimaced at the request, knowing a problem when she saw one. Nothing good could from her aiding Rias in this endeavor. This was something between two pure-blood devil pillars. She was a member of the yokai faction. A yokai faction that was currently at odds with the devils. Rias. She spoke softly. What can I do to realistically help you? We're from opposing factions and you're in a binding contract. If I even entertained the thought of helping, it'd cause nothing but problems. Rias, I feel for you. Truly, I do. But there is nothing I can do to aid you out of this. This issue is bigger than you realize. Instead of being discouraged by Sakura's words, Rias' resolve only seemed to get stronger. You think I don't know that, Sakura? I've read every single line of those documents more times than I can even count. I can recite it word for word to you right now. But I have an idea. It's a long shot and it could totally fail. But I have to try. All I ask is that you hear me out. Please? Will you please just hear me out, Sakura? Sakura's uneasy expression only seemed to grow deeper as she stared into Rias' eyes. Was she really entertaining the thought of helping Rias through this? Curse her damn bleeding heart. Why did she have to be such a good person? Okay. She bit out in exasperation. I'll hear you out. But the second this starts to go downhill, I'm out, Rias. Do you understand me? Rias nodded her head rapidly, a fresh set of tears forming in her eyes. Say it. Say that you understand. I want to hear you repeat it to me. Sakura stated firmly, glaring at the heiress. Rias, once again, nodded rapidly with no hesitation. I understand, Sakura. I promise. A mixture of hope and gratitude surged through Ria's veins as she stared at the pinkette. She allowed her emotions to overwhelm her, leaping across the table and grabbing Sakura into a fierce hug. "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." The medic blanched at the sheer amount of gratitude being shown, not used to having people act this way towards her. She returned the hug, albeit very awkwardly. Hey. Calm down. We haven't even talked about it yet." Rias ignored Sakura's protestations, squeezing her as if her life depended on it. In which case, it kind of did. Sakura could be the key to her happiness. She could solve everything. What a joyous day. "Rias. Come on now. I need to breath." She huffed, trying to push the redhead off her. "Kami." She was stronger than she looked. "Your giant-ass boobs are suffocating me," she cried angrily, cheeks coloring a soft shade of pink. And once again, Rias ignored her. Check the description for the links to the author.